As an assassin, he was treated like a dog on a leash, only to be betrayed and cast aside like a pawn, but then he was reborn into a brand new life where he would forge his own destiny. In the beginning, they wrote him off as talentless. Before long, they were calling him the next in line for the throne, a sword prodigy respected by nobles and feared by his enemies. He no longer lives to serve, but to rise up and one day stand before the very man who took his life. Can honor and vengeance ever truly walk the same path? Let's find out. The story kicks off with the cool night wind, the dim moonlight, and a killer's intuition all whispering the same grim premonition. Rayon, our protagonist, found himself on one knee before Robert Daryus. The man remarked that he had done an excellent job. Rayon agreed, thinking to himself that this was it, he was going to die at this man's hands today. Daryus added that Rayon had proven himself a worthy leader of the shadows. With his work from the darkness, the family's power would grow even faster. Our protagonist calmly replied that he was merely doing what was required of him, all while wondering if a shadow could ever truly defy the will of its master. He stated that a shadow's purpose is to follow its master's will. It's not meant to have a will, feelings, or opinions of its own. Daryus replied with a smirk that this was true, and if Rayon knew that so well, then how dare he act on his own free will? How did he manage to break free from the brainwashing? A jolt of fear shot through Rayon as he wondered how could he possibly know. You see, the Robert family uses intense psychological conditioning to control the shadows, their personal group of assassins. They kidnap or purchase children and train them to become killers for the family. These children handle all the dirty work and take the fall for any consequences right up until the day they die. In other words, these kids are raised to be the loyal attack dogs of the Robert family. Rayon had been brainwashed too, but one day he accidentally shattered those mental chains. But how did Daryus know? Desperate, our protagonist demanded to know how he found out. Daryus explained that he and all the other assassins were wearing two collars. The first was the brainwashing, and the second was this. He snapped his fingers, and in that single moment, an unbearable pain erupted inside our protagonist. He doubled over, coughing up blood, wondering what in the world this agony was. It felt like his heart was being torn clean in half. Daryus nonchalantly added that this particular collar was called the raging worm. There's an insect inside his body that will feast on his heart on command. Rayon realized this was the most nightmarish curse imaginable, a spell that lets you experience the true meaning of being a slave. He seethed that Daryus had actually planted a raging worm in him, as if the brainwashing wasn't enough for them. And this man paraded around acting like a righteous and honorable figure. He was utterly disgusting. Daryus simply replied that he was just a cautious man. After all, Rayon had somehow managed to shake off the brainwashing. He mused that all people wear masks, and it just turned out that his was more impenetrable. Rayon's life flashed before his eyes. He was kidnapped at an age when his memories were still a blur. They raised him to be a hunting dog and a killer, loyal only to the Robert family until he rose to become the head of the shadows. He lived as an empty vessel without his own emotions or thoughts. Then, completely by accident, he discovered a breathing technique called the Ring of Fire. And as if to prove it was once the divine skill of the greatest swordsman on the continent, it allowed him to completely shatter the brainwashing. He thought he could finally dream of being free. Hope had actually started to blossom inside him. So why was he meeting his end here instead of finding that freedom? What sins had he committed to deserve such a meaningless death? Engulfed by the potent magical curse, our protagonist began to force himself to his feet, refusing to accept this fate. If he was going to die here no matter what, then he would at least take an arm with him. No, even landing a single wound would be enough. Daryus watched in shock, wondering how he was even standing in that state. With a final burst of speed, our protagonist lunged forward and inflicted a small cut, thinking that now his death wouldn't be so pathetic. Seeing the fresh wound, Daryus moved with lightning speed and cut off his head, thinking to himself that he had foreseen every possibility. Yet this man had dispelled the brainwashing and even managed to attack him. As Daryus began to walk away, ignoring the sting from the rampaging worm's curse, he noted that it had been a long time since this happened. He couldn't even remember the last time he'd been injured, and now to get a little bite from his own hunting dog. How ridiculous, since the man was dead. There was no need to worry anymore. He ordered the others to dispose of the body. In an instant, the rest of the shadows appeared from thin air, and obediently began to carry out the command. As his consciousness faded away, Rayon's last thought was a cold, hard fact. Daryus was considered the strongest martial artist on the continent. There was never any way he could have defeated him. One was strong and the other was weak. He could not do anything at all. He regretted living such a meaningless life. He regretted being humiliated and manipulated all his life. And he regretted that he was never able to complete the Ring of Fire. He did not care if it was a god or a demon. He asked, "Let someone do it." He wants revenge at all costs. Suddenly a system window appeared, which says that he was chosen by rage. Rage absorbs his target body dead. An error occurred, and a moment later, MC was reborn as a baby. Sylvia, the new mother of the protagonist holding a rattle in her hands, said with a smile, "Let him look." What is so interesting here, she, looking at him, took him in her arms and said that he is her sunshine. What a sweet baby he is. The protagonist thought that he still can't get used to it. The woman who is babysitting him is called Sylvia. He still finds it hard to believe. She took him in her arms and said with a smile, "Go on, try and say mama." The MC, now this woman's baby, thought to himself. He'd been reborn, keeping every single memory from his past life as an assassin. At first he figured he was just dreaming, maybe stuck in a coma for 100 days straight, but as time dragged on, he never woke up. So he had no choice but to accept it. This was reincarnation. A while later, Sylvia, holding him in her arms, wondered aloud if the weather was nice outside today as well. She voiced her hope that the head of the family would return soon to give him a lovely name. The protagonist mused that they couldn't just call him the son forever. The head of the family hadn't shown his face in over 3 months. He must be one heck of a busy man. The MC didn't know much since his reincarnation, but he could tell he'd been born into a wealthy and apparently quite famous family. He figured it was way better than being born a commoner. After all, he still had a score to settle. Rage and the thirst for revenge consumed his thoughts, but he knew he had to be patient. Since he'd never left this room, he had no real idea where he was. He also didn't fully grasp his family's status, let alone the mess he was currently in. Besides, he'd failed to master the Ring of Fire in his past life, which was all the more reason to bide his time. He was once known as the greatest killer in the history of the Robert family. To get his revenge, he could bottle up his emotions for as long as it took. By the way, he wondered, this mansion is massive and opulent. There's no way they're just a famous family. Suddenly, a maid burst into the room, excitedly shouting that the head of the family was about to arrive. Sylvia's eyes lit up. Is father really coming? Hearing this, the MC thought, "Father, does that mean the head of this family is my grandfather?" The woman excitedly said she needed to get ready, but the maid told her it was too late. He was already here. They both froze, waiting for the family head to appear. The protagonist felt a sudden chill, wondering what was causing the heavy tension in the air. 3 figures appeared at the end of the hall, and a guard announced, "The head of the family has arrived. Steers a Gebwa a bagger." The protagonist realized the man's presence alone was enough to create this suffocating atmosphere. If he was right, then there was no doubt. That golden blonde hair, those blazing red eyes, and that bone-chilling aura. It had to be the strongest man on the continent, the head of the Zgart family, the northern king of destruction, Glenn Zgart. It seemed he'd been reborn into the most powerful family on the entire continent. The man looked down at him and asked with a stone-cold expression, "Is this the child?" Sylvia eagerly asked if he'd like to hold him. Glenn took the baby and declared, "From this day forward, his name is Rayon. As the bearer of this name, let him live like a shadow, present but at the same time not." The MC was shocked. Even in this life, he was given the name Ron. Later that night, the protagonist lay in his crib wondering, are they asleep yet? After 100 unbearable days, this was finally his chance. Before, he was always overcome with sleepiness. And whenever he woke up, Sylvia was right there. He had no opportunity to practice with his mana or do anything at all. But now he had his own bed. And that was a very good thing. All right, he thought, isn't it time to begin? He sat up and began to channel the Ring of Fire, recalling how classic training involved breathing to absorb natural mana and concentrating the aura within one's energy core. However, the Ring of Fire he'd stumbled upon was a bit different. Just like how mages circulate mana, he's forming a unique energy cycle within his own body, which will boost his stamina, making him stronger, sharper, and more tuned to mana. It's basically the ultimate training method for anyone aspiring to be a top-tier martial artist. This gives him a huge edge over powerful foes like Daryus, who have no clue about the Ring of Fire. So by using this power, he can fortify both his mind and body, and once he masters the Zgart family's sword style, getting revenge on Daryus won't be just a pipe dream anymore. On top of that, he senses some kind of energy flowing through this body, one that's connected to the ice attribute. That must be why his body is always freezing, even though he's asleep most of the day. It looks like about 9 of his energy points are blocked. This is seriously bad. If this keeps up the cold blocking, his points will eventually kill him. He has to shatter the blockage with the Ring of Fire. But then again, just getting rid of such pure ice energy feels like a total waste. What if he could merge it with the flow of his flames and circulate it through his entire body? After thinking it over, he figured it would work slowly but surely. All of a sudden, he flopped onto his side. Am I really this tired after such a short training session, he wondered. Dang it, I can't. And just like that, he was out cold. Right at that moment, Glenn walked in to check on him. The next morning, our hero started crawling around on the floor. Sylvia, watching him happily, exclaimed how good he was. Just a little more crawling, she encouraged. He inwardly groaned, so sick of playing along with her. He was a grown man, and this whole acting like a baby thing was making him want to scream. With a smile, the woman scooped him up, gushing about how smart he was. Is there anything you can't do? He grumbled to himself that he'd almost rather be freezing all the time than deal with this. Suddenly, the ragged saint walked into the room, calling out to her, "Are you in here?" And seeing him, Sylvia beamed and called him Your Holiness. The saint just smiled and said, "What's all this about? Just call me sir." The MC thought to himself, is this really the ragged saint standing right in front of me? The one with divine powers, legendary medical skills, and abilities known across the entire world? Even though he was the most famous doctor on the continent, he was also the hardest to find since he was always on the move. The ragged saint mentioned he'd heard she'd had a baby and decided to drop by for a look. "So this is the little one?" he asked. The woman nodded with a smile and handed her son over to him. Blonde hair and red eyes, he observed. "He takes right after you, doesn't he?" Sylvia smiled and agreed, asking, "Isn't he just adorable?" The ragged saint replied, "He is cute. Of course he looks nothing like Glenn, so what's his name?" The woman answered a bit nervously. "His name is Ron." He asked disapprovingly, "You don't mean he's named after a shadow? Do you naming your child after a shadow?" What in the world was Glenn thinking? The MC was surprised. Is he really calling the head of the family by his first name? That's pretty informal. He recalled hearing rumors that the Northern King of Destruction and the Ragged Saint were best friends. The old man smiled and said, "Here, let me have a look." He placed a hand on the baby's stomach and his expression turned serious. "This isn't good." Sylvia asked anxiously, "Is something wrong?" The Ragged Saint explained the child is afflicted by a frost curse. His mana circulation is being blocked by ice energy. It's only going to get worse from here. He needs treatment and then he'll be fine, but if he's just left as he is, he won't live for long. The woman asked in horror, "You're joking, right?" The old man replied, "I'll write you a prescription." Just then, a maid came into the room and informed him, "The head of the family is looking for you. I'm to escort you to him." The old man in rags replied, "I'll be there as soon as I'm finished here." She urgently explained, "The master insists on seeing you immediately." The ragged saint muttered with annoyance, "It's always immediately with him." "All right, I get it. Lead the way." The MC thought, so it's a frost curse. That explains everything, but just knowing the problem doesn't solve it. But since I'm already working on the Ring of Fire, it shouldn't be an issue. Suddenly, he felt his mother's tears fall onto his face. Sylvia cried hysterically, "This can't be happening. I can't lose him like this. What did you mean he won't live long? That's just impossible." She would move heaven and earth to make him well again. His mother was ready to do absolutely anything. He couldn't die. He couldn't be sick. The protagonist wondered what this strange feeling in his chest was. His heart felt like it was being crushed. The pain was immense. His entire body ached. It was agonizing. Watching her was pure torture. Suddenly, the protagonist stretched out his tiny hands trying to wipe the tears from her face, and then clumsily managed to say the word, "Mama, In an instant, Sylvia was rushing down the hall toward the head of the family. Hearing the commotion from the corridor, he asked, bewildered, "What's going on? What is all this noise?" Ignoring the maid's protest, the woman burst into the hall. Glenn asked, clearly displeased, "What is the meaning of this behavior? Where are your manners?" She dropped to her knees, bowed her head, and pleaded, "Please save Rayon. She should know his condition. This child is her entire world." She's pleading with him to save the boy. The head of the family, holding a cup, noted that this was a prime example of a martial artist's thorny path. Why should he bother helping someone who is incapable of contributing to the family? Sylvia insisted that he was his own grandson. Glenn shot back, asking what kind of grandson she brought him after running away from the family. He declared the only thing he was willing to give the boy was the Zgart surname. She should be thankful for that and not dare to ask for anything more. He had nothing else to say. He then ordered the guards to remove her. Sylvia screamed hysterically, begging him to save Rayon. After she was escorted out, the ragged saint sighed, remarking that Glenn was a stubborn fool. Was it really so hard to be honest? Why was he putting on such a show, especially since Glenn was the one who summoned him to check on his grandson's condition? Glenn took a sip of his drink and told him to cut the chatter and just spit it out. The saint reiterated that, as he'd said, the 9 mana streams in the boy's body were blocked by ice energy, and as he grew older, his condition would only continue to worsen. While Glenn's aura was suppressing the cold for now, he'd be all right for a while, but his grandson would almost certainly never become a martial artist. Glenn took another sip and remarked that as long as the boy was alive, everything was fine. The ragged saint pointed out that he was singing a completely different tune just moments ago. He told Glenn to just admit he thought his grandson was cute, but then questioned why he gave him the name Rayon. With all the wonderful names in the world, why call him a shadow? The head of the family replied that the name didn't originally mean shadow. Thousands of years ago, it held an entirely different meaning. Sometime later, Sylvia, holding the protagonist and a spoonful of medicine, gently explained that this was the remedy the ragged saint had provided. She warned him it would be bitter, but asked him to endure it for just a moment. She fed it to him, fully expecting a cry of protest. But our protagonist calmly stretched out his hands and began to babble. Overjoyed, the woman called out to the maid Helen, happily noting that he was enduring it and eating. She said with admiration that it was amazing. Usually children can't stand bitter things. It was as if he understood her intentions. Sylvia shed a few tears and hugged him tightly. The MC thought that while it was slightly bitter, this fire attribute medicine was exactly what he needed right now. After all, a fire attribute is the perfect counter to a frost curse. The woman asked if he could truly understand her feelings. The protagonist remained silent, thinking he would just let them keep feeding him the medicine he needed. After some time, the protagonist reflected that 2 years had passed since he began his training and started taking the medicine. Thanks to both. The creation of the Ring of Fire was in full swing. After reaching the first stage of his technique, he spent 2 years in constant training, interrupted only by silly games with Helen and Sylvia. There wasn't a more diligent child on the entire continent than him. He trained in secret after lights out while everyone else was sound asleep. Time continued to fly, and now he is 5 years old. A system window appeared before him announcing that the second stage of the Ring of Fire was now available. The effect increased his fortitude, mana, sensitivity, willpower, and his total amount of energy. The MC smiled and noted that he had finally done it. He thought about how he'd reached the second stage of the Ring of Fire technique. At this stage, a cross-shaped energy circulation opens up, and he could also feel mana much more clearly. He wondered if the system messages would explain this further. Suddenly, Helen entered the room with a smile, noting that he was up so early today, and asking if she could take his laundry. The protagonist agreed, thinking to himself that she clearly couldn't see the information window floating in front of him. The message windows had been appearing ever since he reached the first stage of the Ring of Fire. At first, he didn't understand where they came from, but the system had proven to be quite convenient. It allows him to track his current status. Judging by Helen's reaction, the window was definitely only visible to him. Anyway, now that he had reached the second stage, his low stamina and the frost curse were still an issue. If he didn't have the fire attribute medicine, it would have been much harder to improve so quickly. The medicine was one thing, but for these 5 years, Sylvia, Helen, and everyone else in the annex had been constantly worrying about his well-being. They treated him as if he were a crown prince on the verge of death. which also played a role. And while he's already turned 5 years old, he still has a lot of time ahead of him. So there's no point in rushing things. The Frost Curse is still a major issue, not to mention his low stamina. Because of that, he gets completely gassed the moment he starts moving around too much. But in his past life, he was called the greatest assassin for a reason, which is how he developed the incredible Ring of Fire technique. Once he masters it completely in this new body, he can use his past life's experience to wipe out all these physical problems in one go. And after he learns the Zgart family's sword skills, he'll finally be able to take Daryus' head, but he can't rush it. Daryus is one of the most powerful masters on the entire continent. If he lets his thirst for revenge get the better of him when they finally meet, he won't stand a chance. You can count the number of people strong enough to even challenge Daryus on one hand. So even though it's going to be a slow process, he has to focus on getting stronger first. The moment an opportunity presents itself, he needs to be ready to land a decisive blow, and that means the training never stops. Just then, Sylvia walked into the room smiling as she noticed he was awake. She gently reminded him, asking if he remembered they had somewhere to be today. She told him to get changed and ready to head over to the main building. Our MC realized that the day had finally come. On this continent, there are the 6 emperors and the 5 demons, the major powers that keep everything in balance. And the Zgart family he was reborn into just happens to be one of those 6 emperors. The 6 emperors represent the forces of good, while the 5 demons are the forces of evil, constantly in a struggle to see which way the scales of power will tip. To see if any new unknown variables have popped up in a family, they hold a determination ceremony, and today was the Zgart family's turn. A short while later, they arrived at a massive mansion. Everyone there was already gossiping among themselves. One guy asked another if this was his first time attending since last year's ceremony. The other guy shot back, sarcastically, that he'd been swamped with missions. He then mentioned hearing that today was all about testing the kids from the Branch family. The first guy mentioned he'd heard Lord Charon's 4th son was participating. The other confirmed it, adding that, rumor has it it's Sylvia's son, which left the first guy looking confused. He asked what he meant, wondering if it was that outcast. Just then, our hero and his mother walked into the hall, and immediately every eye in the room shot daggers at them. The whispers started right away, with people pointing out that the child was indeed her son. He was so tiny, making it seem like the rumors about his poor health were true. They sneered that he inherited the blood of a failure and that nothing could be done about it. Or, to be more precise, an outcast. They couldn't believe all sorts of riffraff were being let into the sacred ceremony hall. Why was the son of an outcast even being allowed to participate in the determination ceremony? This just goes to show how far the family's standards have fallen. Listening to all this, our MC noted that all the insults were coming from members of the main family branch. He wondered if they'd all planned this out or something. He couldn't care less what they said about him, but he drew the line at the whispers about his mother. Sylvia, sensing his tension, called his name and gave him a reassuring smile, telling him everything was all right. She told him to just keep his eyes on her. Suddenly, a powerful voice boomed through the hall, announcing the arrival of the head of the Zgart family. Glenn made his entrance and took his seat on the throne. Our protagonist thought to himself that it had been a long time. 5 years, wasn't it? With a grim expression, the family head observed that it looked like everyone had assembled. In a flash, the sword of justice materialized in the center of the hall, and a voice announced that they were beginning the determination ceremony. Our MC was taken aback, realizing it was the legendary sword of justice. The moment you touch that weapon, it instantly gauges your predisposition to mana. An aide announced that it was time to start. The first participant would be Ron Zgart. Buren acknowledged the call, walked up to the sword, and placed his hand on it. Our hero recalled that, starting at the age of 4, the mana channel in a child's skull, the one that opens to the heavens, begins to seal itself shut. After that point, their mana level doesn't really change all that much. That's why kids are brought to the determination ceremony to figure out their ultimate potential. In reality, the entire assessment happens right here and now. As Buren touched the sword, a powerful gust of wind swirled around him. The crowd buzzed with excitement, noting that based on the light glowing from the sword, he possessed a high-purity attribute, just as you'd expect from one of Karun's children. They all praised what a talented boy he was. Glenn, with a serious expression, stated that it was a fitting attribute for a future swordmaster. He instructed Buren to focus on cultivating his wind affinity from now on. The aide then announced the next participant. One of them was Luna Slyan from the Vassal family. Our protagonist watching all this unfold figured he'd grasped the basic idea. The length of the light beams determined the mana's purity, while the swirls themselves showed its attribute. So this was how the Zgart family sized up the talent of their kids. As the girl placed her hand, the onlookers started buzzing with excitement. Could the Slyan family have produced another genius? Well, she carries their last name for a reason. She's practically on Burns' level. The MC mused that it seemed a person's worth around here was truly decided by talent alone. He figured his own results probably wouldn't be anything to write home about. Even though his ring of fire was at the second stage, the ice attribute was still mixed into his energy. Not that it was a huge deal. After seeing Luna's results, the assistant declared them good. And now for our final participant, Ron Zgart. Let him step forward. Sylvia smiled, telling him it was his turn. Our hero agreed, thinking to himself that he didn't really have any high hopes. He was just curious to find out what kind of mana attribute this body had and which one he should focus on cultivating from now on. The woman asked with a gentle smile. You've seen how the other children did it, haven't you? Just copy them. The protagonist nodded and, walking up to the sword, placed his hand on it. Instantly, everything around him erupted in a blaze of golden fire. The vision that flooded his mind was of the very first head of the Zgart family, sword in hand, wiping out every monster in sight with a single powerful swing. The vision faded, and the MC saw a faint white glow emanating from the sword. People started snickering, remarking that they'd never seen such a pathetic little flicker before. This was colorless mana. What kind of quality could that possibly be? It looked like even the god of war couldn't be bothered with the child of a runaway. Sylvia rushed to his side, smiling reassuringly, telling him everything was okay and that he'd done it perfectly. But the others started sneering that while he might have the blood of a powerful family, this was just too much. They hadn't expected much, but this was a new low. They sneered that they'd only come to see him humiliated, and Sylvia was certainly brave for showing up. It seemed the only things he inherited were his hair color and red eyes. Glenn's voice, laced with annoyance, cut through the noise. There's been enough chatter. The hall's too loud. The selection ceremony's over. Everyone leave. Once all the guests had departed, the head of the family remarked that it seemed there was nothing to be done. My lord, Rowan the butler called out sadly. Glenn thought to himself that he hadn't expected much, but what? Was this? All of a sudden, the sword erupted in a blindingly brilliant light. He gasped in shock. It's a golden light like the sun. This was the aura of the first family head of the Zgart family. It held a divine firepower so immense that not even demonic flames could compare. Golden mana and golden flames had only appeared once in the entire history of their clan. The mana formed a dense golden light, a blindingly beautiful and radiant golden flame. Just what kind of person is this kid? Ron, a little later, once he was outside, the MC pulled up his status window. It read, 9-node frost curse, low stamina, weak mana, sensitivity, ring of fire at stage 2, and water resistance at stage 2. Our protagonist figured that would have to do for now. All right, isn't it about time to level up the ring of fire to stage 3? Fast forward, and he reflected that 7 years had passed since that ceremony. He was now 12 years old. With the help of... He was so close to reaching the 3rd stage of the ring of fire. Things would move along much faster if he could just figure out how to manage this ice. His resistance to the water attribute had leveled up to the 2nd stage, so he wasn't freezing anymore. Moving was still a pain, but his condition was way better than before. He could finally start some physical training. Suddenly, Sylvia called out, telling him to get ready and asking what on earth he was doing out here. She said they had to hurry or they'd be late. Ron reluctantly agreed, figuring it must be time for the next selection ceremony. Great, he thought, now I have to face those annoying jerks again. A little later, once the ceremony was over, the assistant announced that Langresser Reader had performed admirably. And with that, the selection ceremony was done. Watching from the sidelines, Ron wondered if that was it, probably because it was only the side branches. That wrapped up way faster than he expected. All of a sudden, Glenn called out to him, his face dead serious, saying he was sure Ron had received the order to begin basic training. So why haven't you responded for an entire month? Ron was completely baffled, wondering what this guy was even talking about. What basic training? Sylvia frantically jumped in, explaining that Ron was different from the other children. His body was still overwhelmed with ice energy, making it hard for him to exercise. Ron was shocked. How did she know that Glenn answered with a threatening tone, "As long as you are in this family's domain. There are no exceptions for anyone who bears the Zgart name. If you can't walk, you will crawl, but you will train. That is the way of our family." "You can't force him to do this," Sylvia cried out, pleading. "Please just give him a little more time." "Perhaps you'd like to run away from the family again," Glenn sneered. "With that child, you will live on this land as a Zgart. If you don't like it, then get out of here this instant." Mocking whispers started to spread through the crowd. "She'll probably just run away again." "Yeah, right. She doesn't have an energy core or mana flows left to destroy. And how did someone like that end up in the main branch anyway? It's disgusting." Ron knew exactly why they treated his mother with such contempt. She had run away from the family before. Sylvia's posture proved she once studied martial arts, but she had no aura. Apparently, she'd lost her energy core and her mana flows were completely severed. That was the price she paid for marrying his father. But his father died while she was pregnant, leaving her no choice but to come back to this place. It was a given that a main branch member who willingly disgraced the family by leaving would be ridiculed if they ever dared to show their face again. Still, these were just the pathetic words of small-minded people. As long as he was Sylvia's son, there was no way he would just stand by and listen to them treat her like this. Without warning, Ron strode to the center of the hall. "What are you doing?" his mother cried desperately. "Get back here." "I can handle this myself." "It's all right," Ron replied calmly. "I will follow the order and start training next month." The instructor of the first martial arts hall spoke up. "Don't you understand? Even basic training is too much for someone in his condition. You can't force him to do this." Ron replied with a determined look. "It's fine. This is the only way to keep bearing the Zgart name. I will attend." Glenn asked menacingly, "Do you even comprehend the true weight of that name?" In that instant, Ron was slammed by an incredibly powerful aura that made his blood run cold. He felt like he was being crushed by that gaze alone. His heart was pounding out of his chest. This guy was on a whole other level than the Robert family, so this is the power of the Northern King of Destruction. Sylvia rushed over to hug him, shouting at Glenn, "Stop it, Ron is still just a child. He doesn't know what he's saying." The instructor chimed in urgently. "He's just a little boy. I'm asking you to please, calm down." But Glenn bit back, "I am the one speaking now." "He isn't ready for training," Sylvia said, terrified. "Stop crushing him with your aura," Ron thought to himself in stunned silence. "In my past life, I was an assassin, a man who lived and died in the shadows. I was always closer to death than to life, and I never once stepped into the light, but that's all in the past now. I'm done hiding in the shadows. I will no longer live the life of a killer. My name is Ron Zgart now, and I will win back the place that rightfully belongs to Sylvia." Approaching the throne, he explained that he'd grown up isolated in a side building of the estate, so he had no idea just how powerful and influential the Zgart family truly was. If training was the way to understand all that, then he was more than willing. He resolved to himself that he would protect Sylvia and bring happiness back to the people he'd grown to care for. Glenn questioned him, asking if he meant he was going to use the training to judge the family's standards. The protagonist replied that he saw no other way. Glenn then declared he would order the instructor to prepare a training regimen fitting enough not to let him down. He reflected on his past life, where he had been the world's greatest assassin. On top of that, he now possessed the Ring of Fire, a power thought to be nothing more than a myth. By combining his skills, he knew he could secure his spot in this family. He was determined to show them all just how powerful he could truly become. Later, during a training session, Karen Zgart, the instructor of the second training hall, turned to his assistant and asked, "Didn't you tell me this kid was too weak to even walk properly?" The assistant eagerly confirmed, adding that it was what a maid had overheard from the conversation between the family head and that tattered-looking saint. Apparently, the boy was suffering from a severe illness. The instructor's face grew grim as he thought, the kid's body is as frail as ever. How in the world did he withstand the head's aura? Karun noted that thinking back, Sylvia was exceptionally talented herself. He ordered his assistant to send a maid to their building immediately and have her report back on everything that goes on. A while later, at the 5th Zgart training hall, everyone bowed to greet the head of the family. Glenn walked over to the sofa and called out to the instructor, Rimmer, telling him to quit playing dead and get up. Rimmer rose to his feet, remarking that he was in peak condition as usual. Glenn retorted that his little napping act wasn't fooling anyone. All the other instructors were working their tails off, while he, the so-called head instructor, was just lazing around. Rimmer casually replied that they were just following his orders. He was doing the brain work while they handled the manual labor, so it was all perfectly fair. With a stern look, Glenn pointed out that Rimmer was already 50 years old and should start acting like it. Rimmer just smiled back, saying, "Forget all that nonsense about age. I'm an elf. Remember, by the way," Rimmer continued, "are you here for your youngest grandson? Sylvia stopped by earlier, though I have to admit I wasn't expecting you." Surprised, Glenn asked, "She came here a skirt in..." Rimmer grinned and confirmed, adding that she'd asked him to make sure Rayon didn't get hurt. "If that's why you're here too," he said, "you can save yourself the trouble." He reminded Glenn that he'd already made it clear he doesn't interfere with the training process in the 5th hall, and he makes no exceptions. Not even for the family's favorite little prodigy. The head of the family replied with a calm expression, "That's fine, I don't want you to go easy on him. Do as you see fit." "I have no use for weaklings," Glenn stated flatly. Rimmer watched him, a look of amused surprise on his face. Wow, he thought his affection for the kid is even deeper than I realized. He's trying to give this boy all the love he couldn't give Sylvia. Glenn shot back irritably, "If you weren't an old friend, your head would be on the floor right now. Be tough on him. Weed out the weak immediately. I only want you to train those who are worthy." Rimmer simply smiled and said he would handle it his own way. "That's exactly what I expect," Glenn replied before turning to leave. As he walked away, the instructor called out with a grin, "Take care. Once the head of the family was gone, Rimmer wondered to himself just what kind of kid Rayon was. Meanwhile, Rayon opened his status window, which showed that the 3rd stage of the Ring of Fire was now accessible. The effects included increased mental and spiritual fortitude, heightened mana sensitivity, and a larger energy pool. It also boosted his endurance, strength, and agility, while his resistance to the water attribute rose to the 3rd stage, weakening the frost curse. A smile crept onto his face as he thought about how different the 3rd stage felt. His sensitivity to mana had shot up, and his mind felt sharper than ever. He recalled Sylvia's earnest warning not to push himself too hard on the very first day. He realized that because she'd stopped him when she did, his progress had been much smoother. The status window was a huge help for tracking his improvement, but he knew this was just the beginning. The Zgart family's training regimen was notoriously brutal. Reaching the 3rd stage of the Ring of Fire was merely the first step, a solid foundation he would use to keep growing stronger. This way, he'd get ahead faster than anyone else and finally shut up all the trash talkers. And after that, as for the heavenly sword, Daryus, he wouldn't rest until that guy's throat was slit. Suddenly, Sylvia's voice called out to him. She asked with a smile, "You're still awake, aren't you?" The MC asked her why she was there. "It's getting pretty late." She sat down beside him, explaining that since he was heading to the training hall tomorrow, she wanted to talk to him about it. "Do you really have to go?" she asked. "Honestly, I want to stop you. You never complain even when you're in pain. What if you get seriously injured there? It's not that I'm completely against it, but maybe for just one more year, could we please postpone it for at least 1 year?" Our hero replied that there was no need for that. He wasn't going to stand by and take it anymore every time someone from the main or collateral families decided to run their mouth. He was sick and tired of the way they looked down on her and the staff in their annex. He couldn't stand it. He was convinced that if he just excelled in his training, everyone would stop treating them so poorly. Sylvia mentioned she wasn't surprised he was upset about them living apart and all the terrible things people were saying. She explained that she'd unexpectedly fallen in love with his father during a mission, but their relationship was forbidden since he was only a knight, so she gave up her energy core and mana and left her family behind. He learned he actually had an older sister, Shia, who was 2 years older than him. The 3 of them had lived a quiet life together until the Eden mercenaries attacked. His father wasn't particularly strong, and with his mother pregnant with him, they were powerless to fight back. Fortunately, her father had secretly assigned guards to watch over them, but they were positioned too far away to help right away. By the time they arrived, his father and sister were already gone. Devastated and lost, she returned to her family home. Here she's treated like a sinner, and in her heart she believes she deserves it. He thought Sylvia was selfish for abandoning her duties for love, only to come crawling back once it was all gone. He finally understood why everyone treated her so coldly. And yet this was the woman who had given him life and a mother's love. She might have been selfish in the eyes of the world, but to him, she was his one and only mother across 2 lifetimes. He wondered if she regretted her choices. Did she long for the days before she left her family? Sylvia smiled and said she had no regrets. In her family, she was treated like she didn't exist. It was only after she left that she finally felt alive and loved, and that was enough for her. She was so happy during that time that she couldn't possibly regret it now. She just asked him to forgive his awful mother. He told her it was all okay, he was fine, and she shouldn't worry about him. He thought with a smile that it didn't matter what others called her. She was his only mother. He had no one else. He decided he would get his revenge on Daryus after he restored her status within the family. Hearing his words, Sylvia broke down in tears. Flustered, the protagonist asked why she was crying. A while later, he left her room, noting how difficult it had been to calm her down. He needed to practice the Ring of Fire and try to get some sleep. With little time left before training, the protagonist went to his room. Sitting in a meditative pose, he reflected on how well the Ring of Fire circulated now that it had reached the 3rd stage. He wondered what it would be like at the maximum level. Suddenly, as he was using the skill, the area was engulfed in blue flames and the second demon lord appeared. He declared that the time had finally come. The boy's rage had reached him. In the name of rage, he proclaimed he would help the boy's dream of revenge come true. A system window then appeared stating that the rage characteristic was now unlocked. The user's rage has been awakened. The spirit declared, "Now sacrifice your soul and body to me." Wait, why is there a kid here? The protagonist asked in confusion. What is this thing? The spirit shot back that it was wondering the same thing. The rage it felt couldn't have come from a mere child. No, it's definitely him. There's a truly all-consuming dark rage lurking inside him. The spirit continued, "All right, just give me your soul and body and I'll help you get the revenge you desire." The MC wondered if this was happening because of the intense rage he felt toward Daryus before his death. If so, this thing was showing up a bit late. He didn't want to rely on anyone else's help. With a serious expression, he told the spirit he didn't need its assistance. He would get his revenge by himself and defeat Daryus with his own hands. The spirit scoffed, saying he'd misunderstood the situation. It wasn't there to make an offer. The decision had already been made. Suddenly, a cold flame washed over the MC, and he wondered what it was. The spirit then lunged at him, yelling that all he needed to do now was graciously offer up his body. As it got closer, the protagonist felt an intense chill. He thought to himself that his body and even his mind felt like they were freezing solid. This creature's power wasn't fire, but ice. The spirit told him to focus on Daryus and let his rage explode. It promised that with its power, he could kill anyone, even a god. The protagonist realized that he was only managing to resist because of his water attribute, but the attack wasn't just freezing him, it was actively fueling his rage. The spirit added that it would give him the power to utterly destroy his enemy. In return, all it wanted was his body. But the MC worried if he gave in, what would become of Sylvia and the maids. There was no way he was letting this thing take over his body, not for anything. The spirit taunted him, saying he'd feel much better if he just gave in to his rage and accepted his fate. There was no point in holding back anymore. It really wanted to do this cleanly, without causing any unnecessary damage since it planned on using his body. But if he kept resisting, it would just absorb his very essence no matter the consequences. The protagonist felt a frantic energy surge as his body was pushed to the brink of falling apart. He was almost at his limit and couldn't take it anymore. At this rate, he was completely done for. But wait, if his resistance to the water attribute let him endure the cold for so long, then maybe he could use the Ring of Fire to completely seal off his body and soul. The MC struck a pose, his face dead serious, as he realized he had no other choice. He was determined to live. Suddenly, the spirit sensed the fiery energy and shrieked, "It's only been a short time since I awakened." "How is this even possible? You're just a human and a kid at that." Our hero replied with a steely gaze, "I'll get my revenge myself. and I'm not about to let some ghost use my body to do it." The spirit roared in fury. "How dare you call the Lord of the demon world a ghost?" The protagonist just smirked and asked, "How can you be the Lord of the demon world if you can't even kill me? It seems the so-called lords of the demon world are nothing special, so just disappear." It occurred to him that the spirit mentioned it had just awakened. Could that be why it couldn't use its full power? Just then, a system window popped up notifying him that additional skills were now unlocked. The MC wondered in surprise, "What do you mean, additional skills?" Suddenly, the spirit gasped in shock. "Those are my status windows. Where in the world did you get those?" Our hero casually explained that it just shows his abilities in the form of stats. "But is it somehow connected to you?" The spirit boasted that it was the one who created the system. "So I'll ask again, where did you get it from?" The protagonist asked with genuine confusion, "Why would you make something like this?" It replied that it wasn't about to answer him. The MC theorized it must be for rapid growth. The spirit blurted out, "How did you know that?" He thought to himself that this thing was terrible at controlling its emotions. It seemed strange that the ring of fire was spinning so much faster than in his past life, but now it all made sense. It was because of the system's influence. The spirit then furiously screamed, "Give up your power over the system and give me your body." In response, the protagonist threw a menacing punch, his fist crackling with mana, but realized it had no material form. That meant even mana wouldn't work. Considering no one had rushed in despite all the noise, he figured he was the only one who could see and hear it. He began to wave his hand near the entity, and the spirit furiously flew into his palm, solidifying into the form of a bracelet, and said that not much time had passed. Since its seal was broken, but its powers would return soon. When they did, he wouldn't be able to stop it. It vowed to stay with him until the day he died. The protagonist thought, "What a complete leech. I want to get rid of it right now, but then I might lose the system, and who knows what would happen." To Sylvia and Helen, "It's better to keep it close and watch it. I'll just have to suppress it and focus on getting stronger as fast as I can." The protagonist looked down and asked, "Why a flower bracelet?" "It doesn't really suit me." The spirit shrieked in displeasure. "You will respect my tastes." The MC just sighed and accepted it. A little while later in the corridor, Helen was saying, "I'm sure the young master will be fine." Sylvia replied, "I know, but still." At that exact moment, the protagonist came down from the second floor with a smile and announced that he was ready. It was time for him to go to the training hall. As they went outside, the maid said with a warm smile, "Please, stay vigilant and take good care of yourself." The protagonist agreed, adding that he would be careful. "We'll see each other again soon." Helen then called out to Sylvia, asking why she was sending the young gentleman off with such a worried look on her face. "You might make him anxious." Sylvia quickly walked up to him and said with a reassuring smile, "I believe in you." The MC replied that she shouldn't worry. He promised he wasn't going to overdo it and would back off immediately if things got too rough. As the protagonist set off, Sylvia asked anxiously, "Do you think he'll be all right?" Helen noted that he was already looking better. Perhaps he'll even be able to handle the training. She thought to herself that he was looking much healthier now compared to before. The woman recalled her farewell with the protagonist, where Helen noted that out of all the Zen hearts, his instructor was the sharpest. And since he was trying so hard, she was certain he would succeed. The protagonist smiled and agreed, promising her he could handle everything and wouldn't get hurt. He told her not to worry. He'd given his word and would keep it no matter what, asking her to just trust him. At that moment, Sylvia, with a sad look on her face, just asked him to return home safely. Sometime later, standing in the crowd at Zgart's 5th training hall, the MC thought to himself that a ton of people had gathered, and not just from his own family line. There were also students from vassal families and others who had simply received a recommendation, and according to Helen, there were so many people this year that they were even opening up the 6th hall. Suddenly, a couple of students started talking smack about him. One of them sneered that it looked like a light push would make him fall apart, while another questioned why a weakling like him even showed up, especially with a tacky flower bracelet. "He's so tasteless," they muttered. Hearing this, the spirit furiously exclaimed, "How dare they? Those parasites have no concept of taste at all. I'll completely destroy them." The MC calmly walked up to them and asked, "Instead of buzzing around like flies, wouldn't it be better to say what you think to my face?" Or do you not realize how pathetic it is to whisper behind someone's back? The guy shot back, yelling for him to shut up. The only pathetic one here is you, the guy who got sent to the annex. The other one added with disgust, you're not even from the main branch. How dare you call us out? Unfazed. The protagonist pointed out, neither are you. So what gives you the right to judge me? Trash talk is only allowed for someone of a lower rank, isn't it? One of them furiously grabbed him and raised a fist just as Burns suddenly appeared and commanded them to stop. The training is about to start, he declared. Hundreds of people from the outside are here. Do you want to disgrace the Zgart name? The students immediately backed down, offering shameful apologies. Byrne then approached the protagonist and asked why he was sticking his neck out on the very first day, telling him he should know his place. You're nothing more than dust, he said. If you don't want to get kicked out of the annex, you'd better lay low. Byrne thought with annoyance that it was pure luck the leader had even noticed him. And he's already acting like he's all that, he thought. A loser like him will definitely wash out of training. As he started to walk away, he warned, if you don't know how to behave, you should leave right now. You won't be able to handle it anyway. The MC, with a perfectly calm face, teased, you certainly seem important. Where do you get all this arrogance? Is it because you're from the main branch, or do you have other reasons for talking so tough when you know nothing about me? Or did your daddy put you up to it? Go on, Run, and cry to him, and let him punish the bad boy, he taunted. Byrne furiously exclaimed, how dare you? Just then, Rimmer kicked the gate wide open and shouted with a grin, are we fighting already? How brave is it because you're all just kids? Seeing him, the protagonist wondered, is this the magnificent sword of the Zgart family? I heard he retired because of damage to his energy core. I didn't expect to see him here, he thought. The instructor then asked with a smile, why don't you at least hold off on the fight until after the ceremony? Byrne walked away from the protagonist with a look of displeasure and got back in line. Rimmer introduced himself and announced that he was glad to see them all. He explained he would be their instructor for the training and that he'd been told there were 160 recruits here. This is way too many, he stated. So we'll be conducting a small test to weed out the extras. A quarter of you will be plenty for me. The students exclaimed in shock. Only a quarter. But why would he do that, one wondered. The instructor explained, I only need the best. I only train the elite. The protagonist's spirit furiously shouted that he was an arrogant bastard for daring to look down on them. The MC calmly shushed him and kept listening, as Rimmer sat down in a chair and said, my word is law here. This yacht's soar sao to wike. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the head of the family. Well, isn't it about time we got started? So what are you waiting for? Start running. The foundation of martial arts is physical strength and mental fortitude. Run as long as you can until I tell you to stop. As the protagonist ran, the spirit grumbled that if they were going to be forced to run, he should at least be out in front. Why are you lagging behind? He asked. The protagonist shot back that this wasn't a competition, so there was no point in passing anyone. He figured the instructor was assessing their potential and character, not just what he could see with his own eyes. The true winner would be the person who endured until the very end. And he was determined to last no matter what it took. Just then, the instructor's assistants noticed that Byrne and Luna had taken a huge lead. One of them remarked that while everyone was moving fast, those two were on a completely different level. The other noted that they weren't even at their top speed yet. He was certain they could maintain that pace for another couple of hours without stopping. For them to be at this level at only 12 years old, it was terrifying to imagine their future potential. An assistant pointed at the main character and asked, that kid's name is Ron, right? He's clearly struggling to keep up and is already falling behind. The other replied that he'd heard Ron was sick. It's honestly a shock he's running at all, but he already looks completely exhausted. Rimmer, who overheard their conversation, thought with a smirk, well, now this is interesting. I've never seen a kid like him before. What's his story? He'd always believed that the people whose talents he couldn't immediately grasp were the ones who would become the strongest on the continent. His ability simply couldn't peer into the true depths of their power. He could see the destiny of most children clear as day. But this boy Ron was a complete mystery to him. He was obviously on a level so far beyond Rimmer that his vision couldn't reach him. What an amusing spectacle, he thought. At that moment, the other students started to taunt the protagonist, saying he talked a big game, but was now dragging his feet at the back of the line. Another one sneered that it served him right. He'll wash out soon enough. Just look at his face. He won't even last another 10 minutes. The main character thought, isn't this weird? They promised us some kind of hellish training, but we're just running. In his past life, he had to sprint for his life from enemies and savage beasts, and this was just a normal run. Isn't this a little too easy? After some time, Rimmer watched the protagonist's form and wondered in pure astonishment, what in the world is this? How is he still running? His stamina should have been completely depleted long ago. He's running way past his limits. He shouldn't have a shred of strength left. Is he actually moving on sheer willpower alone? This kid is willing to train until it literally kills him. The instructor cracked a surprised smile, noting that he was definitely getting interested. Meanwhile, Burren, seeing the protagonist still pushing forward, asked with irritation why he was still running. He'd been told the kid was too fragile for training. He remembered an instructor telling his father that according to the saint in rags, Sylvia's son had almost no chance of even surviving childhood. Mastering martial arts was supposed to be impossible for him because of the frost curse. Burren thought he looked incredibly frail, so why in the world was he still running? The whole thing was just so infuriating. He was going to show him the unbridgeable gap between them. That kid would never be able to keep up with him. He activated his aura and shot forward at an incredible speed. The main character simply thought, he acts like a high and mighty nobleman, but he's really just a child. Even Luna is more mature than him. In any case, this test wasn't a race, it was a battle of attrition. There was no reason for him to ruin his own pace just because that guy wanted to showboat. After a while, a couple of the other students started to falter. One of them looked at him completely baffled and asked how he was still going. A girl with a sour look on her face piped up saying she'd heard he was sickly and asked, "Is he seriously not tired at all?" Hearing this, the protagonist thought to himself that he actually felt like he was on the verge of death from the cold energy raging inside him. It seemed like his lungs and heart were about to give out at any second. But he was pushing through by using his ring of fire to wring out every last drop of energy. The skill had improved a ton recently, and if he could just push it to its absolute limit, the benefits would kick in soon enough. Suddenly, the spirit of rage materialized, taunting him. "So this is the state you're in, and you're supposed to be my future vessel. Just hand over your body to me. I'll crush that blue-haired kid with ease. I could freeze this entire place solid." The MC thought anxiously that he just had to hold on. Rage was trying to flood his mind, but he had to act like everything was fine. He shot back at the spirit, telling it to shut up and stay quiet. His face a perfect mask. It wasn't going to work on him. The spirit just smirked, boasting that no one could ever withstand its fury. "We'll just see how long you can last." The protagonist clutched his chest, thinking he absolutely had to endure. If he showed even a hint of weakness, this thing would devour him completely. The spirit, annoyed, exclaimed, "What a stubborn punk! Why isn't my rage working on him?" Meanwhile, the protagonist was thinking, "I'm so tired. I feel like I'm actually dying. My body won't listen and my vision's going blurry. I can't even breathe right. Is this really my limit?" Just then, Rimmer announced the end of the run. All the students immediately stopped gasping for air. As Burr passed by the protagonist, he muttered with annoyance, "What a ridiculously stubborn guy." The MC thought to himself, "I seriously almost kicked the bucket back there. It looked like he wouldn't be getting any rest in this life either." The spirit of rage yelled in frustration, "You're a total monster. How did you manage that?" The protagonist shot back, "Told you it wouldn't work." He thought to himself that the struggle had also helped level up his ring of fire, and thanks to the status window, he could see his physical potential had improved. "If I keep training like this..." Suddenly, a system window popped up, announcing that the conditions had been met. Physical capabilities exceeded. Experience gain increased. Strength stat raised by 2 points. Agility by 1 point. And endurance by 1 point. Seeing this, the spirit of rage screeched in disbelief. "What is this? He gets extra experience just for having me in his system. This is absolutely ridiculous." The instructor then gathered everyone and told them they did a great job. That concludes the test. So, about that thing I said earlier about only picking a quarter of you, I was lying. You can all relax. The students erupted, shouting that they had run their guts out for his stupid test. Rimmer explained that he couldn't just kick out that many people on the very first day, but warned them that it was a one-time thing. If they continued performing like they did today, most of them would definitely be cut. He was sure he'd told them to run as if their lives depended on it, but out of 160 people, not a single one did except for one guy. Some of you gave up and some of you sneakily used your aura. Honestly, I don't really care how you managed to pass. After all, it was just a test. But from here on out, you better try to do exactly as I say and you won't fail. Don't think for a second it's going to be this easy again. For now, you can consider yourselves provisional students. In 6 months, you'll take the final exam, and that's when I'll really be watching. I'm only planning on keeping the best of the best, although I won't even be the one grading you. And now you can all head to the comfy dorms provided by the Zgart family. Oh, and one more thing to your left, you'll see the training center. A little while later, Rimmer strolled into the forest, where he spotted Glenn and realized someone had taken his usual resting spot. "So how'd it go?" the instructor asked with a grin. "Why are you even asking me? You've been here the whole time." "So you saw everything perfectly. You probably noticed that Burr and Luna are incredibly talented newcomers, and that the other kids have the potential to become pillars of the family. However, I saw nothing special in Ron. I was positive he was completely drained. So how on earth did he manage to run for so long? For the first time since we met, I couldn't read someone at all. Ever since my core was damaged, my life has been so dull. But now it feels like things are about to change." Glenn hopped down from the rock and remarked, "I'm thinking I'd like to be an instructor for the new recruits myself, and to focus on his duties." As the leader left, Rimmer smiled, agreeing, but added that he had a feeling some of this year's students were worth paying very close attention to. Glenn replied that it was just a coincidence and that Rayon would never be able to become a martial artist. The instructor just grinned, knowing full well that it was anything but a coincidence. A while later, the main character announced that since training was over, he was heading to the training center. The spirit of fury asked in disbelief, "You're going to train again. Do you ever take a break?" The students who overheard him groaned that this was just impossible. Later, as they were sitting in their room, one of them grumbled that there was no way he could have lasted that long on his own. He must have cheated somehow. Another agreed, adding that everyone knew about his poor health. That's when Ron Zgart, a representative of a side branch, spoke up, that they figured he must have used some kind of special remedy. Word on the street was that a saint in rags had personally mixed the medicine for him. They exclaimed, "What is this?" Supposed to mean that he ran for so long by chugging a potion. "He's got some nerve using an advantage like that," Crane asked with a smirk. "Well then, don't you all think we should teach this loser a lesson?" A little while later, they managed to corner our protagonist, shoving him hard against a tree. He asked in confusion what they were doing. Crane just smirked and shot back, "Are you seriously asking?" One of the goons furiously shouted that he'd used a magic potion just to show off. "Now I get why. You were so damn confident." Another one yelled, "If it wasn't for that holy remedy, you wouldn't have lasted a single minute. You think you can use dirty tricks, and nobody will find out." The MC was just baffled at how they were losing their minds over such a stupid reason. They started cracking their knuckles and said with nasty grins that they were about to teach him a private lesson. Crane, with a sly smile, added that this was just common practice, nothing personal. He'd heard the instructor correctly after all. Learning is the light of the future. He then lunged forward to throw a punch. The spirit of fury grumbled discontentedly, "How long are you going to sit here and listen to their annoying whining? And you call yourself my vessel? These punks are not a big deal." Instantly, the MC seized the initiative and slammed his fist into the guy's face before asking, "You guys want to learn something? All right, then, class is in session." Another one of them decided to attack, but the protagonist deftly drove a knee into his gut and took him out of the fight. The last one standing asked fearfully, "What the hell are you doing? You don't really think you can lose to someone like him, do you?" The protagonist instantly decked him and began to mop the floor with the rest. The spirit of fury, watching the whole thing admiringly, noted that it was surprising how well he was handling himself. After a bit, Crane was on his knees apologizing and admitting they were wrong. The MC pinned his arm with his foot and said with a smile, "If you want this lesson to end, you'll answer one question correctly. Who put you up to this? Was it Burr?" He frantically replied that it wasn't true. He didn't know anything. They had decided to do it themselves. Burr had nothing to do with it. The protagonist thought that this was unexpected. He was sure that guy hated him. Maybe all wasn't lost just yet. Our protagonist then proposed, "Let's keep the contents of our little lesson a secret. How does that sound?" Crane responded in terror that he could do as he pleased. The MC grabbed him by the hair and said, "You and your friends better stay away from me or you'll get extra lessons. A final lesson. If you so much as touch my shadow again, you'll disappear. If you understand me, then get out of my sight." At that moment, Rimmer, who was peeking from behind a tree, thought that this was quite the tense scene. It felt like their young master had returned to his old self. It seems he's actually gifted in martial arts. Then again, he is a Zgart. It's not surprising. He's a talent growing in the shadows, hidden among all these other gifted kids. It never fails to amaze me. Sometime later, the protagonist returned to his room. A system window popped up, which said that the conditions were met. Rage is pleased with his actions. Dexterity increased by 1 point. The spirit himself exclaimed with displeasure, "You got bonus points for that. What kind of nonsense is this?" The MC, with a calm face, pointed out, "You're the one who made the system, so what's..." With all the questions, he irritably shot back, "Of course you don't get it. You've never had your own system hijacked before." He swiped the power meant for the MC and doesn't have a shred of gratitude. Now he's got a proposition for him. How about a little wager? If the MC wins, he gets a sweet bonus. If he loses, he has to stop resisting rage. Just then, system windows popped up, making it official. Rage was offering a bet. The condition was to ace a training test with the top score. If he succeeded, he'd get a 2-point boost to all his stats, plus another stat of his choice. But if he lost, he'd get hit with a 10-day rage penalty. The MC asked what he meant by this test Rimmer had mentioned. The spirit confirmed it was the one where the instructor said he'd pick the best students. Then our hero asked what exactly a stat of his choice meant. Rage explained that he'd get to claim one of the spirit's own stats. Of course, this would weaken the spirit, seeing as it was just a freeloader. The protagonist then asked what the rage penalty was all about. The spirit replied that he'd basically give in to the emotion of rage and fall a little more under its control. It was just a small nudge, but for Rage, it was more than enough. He wouldn't be able to keep his composure so well anymore. The MC realized, so that was the spirit's endgame. Considering its usual behavior, he didn't think it was lying. It had always been surprisingly honest with him. Besides, the rewards for winning were just too tempting to pass up. It was like being offered a poisoned apple. Getting to the top of the class would be a long shot for a normal sick kid, but he was reincarnated. Our protagonist figured it didn't sound like a bad deal. "All right," he said, "I accept your challenge." With a sly grin, the spirit called it a wise choice and a system window appeared, announcing that he had accepted Rage's conditions. Our hero was confident, thinking there was no way he could lose with his past life's experience. Sometime later, after another brutal training session, all the students were collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. A little earlier, Rimmer had ordered them all to hold a horse riding pose. He said it sounded stupid, but it was the very foundation of their martial arts course. They all needed to learn how to endure it. He told them to hold the stance until he said so while he was going to take a nap. Of course he wasn't forcing anyone. As he said, they were the ones who had to pass the test, not him. At that moment, one of the students finally snapped, shouting that he couldn't take it anymore. When were they going to learn how to actually fight with swords? A girl chimed in that all they ever did was run around and stand in silly poses. Vernon, however, asked with a calm face what there was to complain about. He argued they could practice with swords on their own time. If they only focused on basics, they'd forget what they'd already learned. The spirit of Rage watching this noted that the others were leaving. They were off to practice their sword skills by themselves. "Aren't you going?" it asked. The MC simply replied that there was no need for that. What was the point of learning fancy combat techniques if he hadn't properly strengthened his body with basic training? He figured he didn't even need a sword right now. His priority was to build up his core physical strength and endurance. His body was weaker than the others because of the frost curse, so the basics were absolutely essential for his growth and training. For now, he wasn't in any hurry, so he would focus on conditioning his body. With that, our protagonist entered the gym and began working through various exercises. At that very moment, Luna, peeking from behind a wall, was thinking about that boy Ron. He was getting stronger incredibly fast and was already lifting much more weight than he did yesterday. They all said he was sick, yet he kept increasing the weight every single day. Sure, it's normal for someone to get stronger with daily trainings, but at the same time, it's almost impossible to increase the weight you're lifting every single session. He was already able to lift 10 kilograms more than at the start of the week. Maybe it was just his different approach to training. But how could he be so strong while suffering from an illness? There was definitely something more to him. The girl walked right up and stood in front of him. The MC, a bit confused, asked, "Did you need something?" Without answering, she just kept looking at his face, thinking to herself, how is he progressing so quickly? After a moment, she sat down next to him and started lifting a barbell herself. They continued to work out, but as she glanced at him, she was sure she wasn't just imagining it. From the moment she caught a whiff of that cool, pleasant aroma coming off him, her own body began to feel lighter. Thanks to this, she was able to lift way more weight than usual. After some time, she was just sitting there on the bench, staring at her own hand when Ron walked up and asked, "You sure you don't have anything to say?" She just shook her head, and he, scratching the back of his neck, just walked away. She watched him go, thinking she ought to keep an eye on him for a little while longer. After a bit, Byrne glared after them, and his buddies indignantly asked why she was even hanging out with a guy like him. What's so special about some dude who isn't even from the main family? One of them scoffed that his training methods were total garbage. All that endless strength training is pointless. Ron's weak, so I guess that kind of training is necessary for him. But even if he gets all beefed up, he'll never be on our level. He has no idea what's coming for us in the test. If he really wanted to prepare, he'd be better off practicing his swordsmanship, at least for some basic self-defense. Who cares about that outcast from a branch family anyway? Come on, let's go. The test results will say it all. A little while later, Ron was back at it, lifting dumbbells. Dorian shuffled over and awkwardly introduced himself, asking if he could join in. He put a hand to his chest and asked if Ron would mind if he showed him the proper form, mentioning he was a student who got in on a recommendation. Ron replied that he didn't mind one bit. A beaming Dorian immediately opened his bag, thanked him, and said, "I've got some cookies here. Here, you've got to try one." "Say, they're delicious," he insisted. Ron took the cookie, but then glanced over at Luna and said, "I don't want it. You can have it." He was then caught off guard when he saw Luna's intense gaze completely fixed on the cookie. He handed her the treat, thinking to himself, well, what do you know? The training continued day in and day out. The calendar pages turned, autumn leaves began to fall, and just like that 6 months had passed. Every single day, Ron ran himself into the ground as if his life depended on it. The backs of the guys who left him in the dust on the very first day were no longer blocking his view. After a hard, exhausting struggle, he'd left almost everyone behind him. As time went on, only 2 people remained in front of him. A little while later, the instructor announced that he was glad to see them all. He then asked the parents and guardians to please take their seats. At that very moment, Wrath zipped over to Ron and sneered, "You didn't forget about our bet, did you? Don't get your hopes up. There's no way you'll be able to overtake those 2. He grinned maliciously, adding, "Get ready to surrender to my rage." Ron just waved a dismissive hand, shooing him away, and said, "Who even knows what the conditions for this test are?" "We don't know yet." He then turned to Dorian and asked what he was doing. Dorian, holding a plank on the ground, replied that he was just really nervous about the test. "I couldn't sleep a wink last night," he whined. What a weakling. Ron thought, how's he going to get through this? Ron stayed quiet as Luna called his name and asked if he wanted a cookie. She held the treat out to him, but he just held up a hand and said, "No thanks." And that's when he spotted Byrne, making him think, why can't these weirdos just leave me alone? Meanwhile, as Sylvia was finding her seat, she excitedly told Helen, Look, I found Ron. He looks so proud and confident." Helen smiled warmly and replied, "I see him. He survived 6 months of that brutal training, and it looks like he's even made some friends." "I'm not surprised at all with how friendly he is. Young Master Ron has always been so considerate even as a child. He was never once capricious. He's already made friends. I'm so proud of him." Just then, Rimmer called for everyone to greet the head of the family, and onto the stage walked Glenn himself. A shockwave went through the crowd. The patriarch was here. Is he actually going to watch? He's never come to watch before. After that, the head of the family took his seat, and the instructor asked in surprise, "Patriarch, what brings you here?" Glenn simply replied, "The family's future depends on these children. Why shouldn't I watch? Or perhaps you're not happy to see me." Rimmer nervously scratched the back of his head with a forced smile and stammered, "Not at all, sir. You are always welcome here, Patriarch." He then raised his hand and announced cheerfully, "Well then, since the head of the family himself has honored us with his presence, we won't delay any further. We will now begin. Okay, I'll give you the test details in a nutshell." In the very next instant, he unleashed his powerful aura. The kids instinctively threw their arms up to shield themselves from the pressure, and he explained, "You just have to break through this aura of mine. That is the one and only condition for passing this test. Aura is an integral part of any martial artist. This test will determine whether you are worthy of becoming one." One of the men present, folding his arms over his chest, objected. "Hold on," he complained. "These kids haven't really studied aura. Why is this suddenly on the test?" Another quickly agreed with him. "That's right. Some of them haven't even started practicing with it. This is totally unfair." Someone else whispered, "They say he sleeps during training. And what's that supposed to mean?" Rimmer sighed, closing his eyes, and explained that aura isn't like some muscle you can train. It's the original power that comes from the strength of a master's spirit. It is the spirit that serves as proof that one is a true martial artist. The aura is merely secondary. The man objected, "What the hell is he even talking about?" The next second, Glenn confirmed that he wasn't lying. Even if you haven't trained to control your aura, every person has an inner will that responds to it. This test can be passed with the strength of your spirit alone. The instructor just grinned, confirming it, then threw his arms wide and asked, "All right then, any other complaints?" "Okay, time to start the test. Luna, you're up first." He then motioned for everyone else to back up. As she walked up, he explained the deal. "All right, Luna, for this test, I'm going to unleash a burst of aura. If you've really been putting in the work, you should be able to push through it. The goal is to break past my aura and tag me." And just like that, it began. A split second later, a massive wave of aura exploded from his body. Luna instinctively threw her hands up and squeezed her eyes shut as Rimmer commented with a smirk, "Oh yes, using your own aura to fight back is against the rules. She has to rely purely on the willpower she's been building up this whole time." Gritting her teeth, Luna took one small step after another, her hand outstretched, and after a tense few moments, her fingers closed around his. The instructor placed a hand on her head, a proud smile on his face, and said, "You did it. That just proves how hard you've been training. Keep that same energy going." As Luna gasped for air, Rimmer announced that Dorian was next. Dorian yelped in terror. "Me, who's picking the order here?" Rimmer simply replied that he was on a whim. "Now get up here." Beads of sweat started rolling down his face as he shuffled toward the instructor. Rimmer asked, "You saw what Luna did, right? Same deal for you. Push through my aura surge using nothing but your willpower." Dorian stammered, "But will that even work? I'm not exactly the most strong-willed guy." The instructor just shrugged. "Don't think so, then no it won't. But you also won't pass." With that, he unleashed his aura. Dorian immediately shut his eyes and threw his arms up to shield himself. He was already down on one knee, and the protagonist watching this unfold thought to himself that the pressure of the aura blast was being adjusted for each student. The instructor was tailoring it to each kid's level and how much they'd improved. It seemed he really had been watching every single one of them. That Rimmer. A few moments later, the instructor leaned down to Dorian, who was now clutching his hand, and said with a grin, "You did it. You passed. You sell yourself way too short, but you've actually got what it takes. You just need to try and believe in yourself a little more." The very next second, the kid threw up, and Rimmer added that he hoped the message got through. Next, Burr Zgart. Burr answered with a firm yes. As he stepped up, the instructor announced he was starting immediately. He gave Burr a serious look, folded his arms across his chest, and unleashed his aura. As Burr shielded himself, he couldn't help but wonder, is this what everyone else went through? It looked so much easier from the sidelines. How in the world did Luna manage it? His body trembling from the strain, he collapsed to one knee, completely pinned down. Rimmer began to speak, his voice sharp. "Your talent is special. You're more gifted than most here. Out of 160 students, maybe only a couple can match you. But both you and your little cronies have just been wasting your time. What's the point of all that sword training if you can't even handle a test of willpower? You should have been building your physical and mental fortitude, not just playing around with a sword. Every time things got tough, you just relied on your aura. That's not going to fly here." The boy knew he couldn't fail. The memory of his father's cruel, cold stare at his brother on the day he was kicked out was still burned into his mind. If he couldn't even handle this, he'd be thrown away too. With a final decisive push, he lunged forward and grabbed the instructor by the leg. Rimmer just casually stuck his hands in his pockets and said, "You pass. You're only 12. Stop trying to act like a grown-up and just practice what you're told. If you keep staring at the sky, you're bound to trip over what's right in front of you. Remember that." Then he glanced to the side and said, "Okay, last but not least, Ron." Ron nodded and stepped forward. The instructor grinned. "So you're the last one, ready to go." Ron replied coolly, "Of course." Rimmer said that, in that case, they'd begin. He then unleashed his aura, but this time it was on a whole other level. The force was so immense that even the spectators in the stands watched in terror. His mother anxiously called out his name and shouted, "What is this insane pressure?" Ron, however, stood there, unfazed, not even bothering to shield himself, and asked, "Is this my test?" Rimmer just smiled and asked, "So what if it is? You're no worse than Burr or Luna. Let's see you withstand it." The protagonist finally brought his hands to his face, thinking that it wasn't about physical strength, but the strength of one's spirit that mattered here. And his spirit had been forged not just by this life as a Zgart, but by his past one as a killer. He began to move forward, little by little, and the instructor, perplexed, thought, did he hold out? The head of the family also tensed up, watching what was happening, and Rimmer said in shock, "How is he thought, how is this possible? This should not have happened." The next second, the protagonist touched his stomach with his hand. Those present froze in surprise, and the protagonist asked, "He passed right?" The children discussed in bewilderment. He was able to pass through such an aura. This is some kind of nonsense. He really did it. How could a sick child who does not even know how to use an aura do it? The instructor frowned, looked at him, and asked, "Who is he?" He replied that they have known him for 6 months. "He is wrong." Rimmer raised his voice. He asks, "Because what he did is impossible. He created an aura explosion that should be beyond his level. He just wanted to make fun of him. With his level, there is no way he could overcome it." Ron calmly shrugged his shoulders, and then Rimmer sighed in surprise, then scratched the back of his head, laughed, and said, "Something carried away. He apologizes. Ron was the last test subject for today. The test is over. Now he will announce the best newcomer. The best student of the 5th training hall is Ron." Sylvia said happily with tears in her eyes, "There Rahan is the best student." The maid, turning to her, happily exclaimed, "Young Master Rahan did it." The others were chatting among themselves. What Ron became the best in the test results, but he just broke through the aura explosion. How could he be ranked higher than young Master Byrne? The next second, Byrne shouted, "He protests. This can't be unfair." The instructor asked, "Why would it be unfair?" He replied, "Ron's stamina, strength, and intelligence were clearly inferior to his. He couldn't admit that someone like that was the top." "Student!" He pressed his hand to his chest and shouted that he was sure he had cheated somehow. The others present began to mutter among themselves. It sounded plausible. How could he do that? If he was under the frost curse, he heard that he didn't even have an aura. Could it be that he and the instructor were just cheating them? Considering the rumors surrounding him, it sounded plausible. Byrne pointed his finger at the protagonist and said that they were the martial arts masters of the Zgart family. He believed that the best student should be determined through a duel, not a stupid test. Rimmer smiled, looked at him, and said, "So his test results weren't satisfactory. He wanted to be the best. He exclaimed embarrassedly that it wasn't like that." The instructor then looked at the head of the family and said that the exam was already over. "Head, what do you think? What should we do?" He replied, "Ron it." Seems like the others are unhappy with his result. Does he want to fight Byrne for the title of the best? MC firmly replied that he refuses and thanked him. The test is over. The results are obvious. Why should he get into a fight if it costs nothing? After that, he looked at Byrne and added, "He always talked about the honor of the main branch. You also need to be able to accept defeat with honor." He shouted indignantly. "What an idiot." Glenny said, "Then they will do this. There will be a reward for the place of the best student. He will give a bronze emblem to the winner." The protagonist was surprised. A bronze emblem. Gold, silver, and bronze emblems are given to those who are able to achieve something. The rewards that can be obtained depend on the material of the emblem. Although this is bronze, it is from the head of the family himself. He is sure that he will be able to get valuable things for it. It seems that no one here is satisfied with the fact that he took first place in the ranking. After that, he said, okay, and Drake, the head of the family, leaned his face on his fist and said, okay, then they will begin immediately. Now the real top student will be determined. It will be decided in one round. If they use aura or weapons, they will be disqualified immediately. They must only use their own strength. Rimmer raised his hand and said, then they will begin. With that, he waved his hand. Burr, swinging his fist, quickly ran forward and hit, but the protagonist dodged to the side. After that, his opponent swung his leg trying to hit, but the protagonist put out his hand, blocking his attack with his foot. Burn concentrated energy in his fist and shouted that he must bite off the fist of the righteous tiger, his father's technique. It is not forbidden to use fist-fighting techniques, which means he is not cheating. With a grunt, he drove his fist right into Ron's stomach. The spectators erupted, shouting, "That's Lord Burn for you. This Ron kid can't even touch him." Burn, grinding his teeth, continued his assault, convinced that this nobody was just a side character far weaker than him. He thought, just give up on becoming the top student already. He recalled his father's harsh words. There was no point in worrying about this kid. The family didn't need such pathetic weaklings. He couldn't let his father down. Burn felt his father's gaze on him. He had to prove himself. He swore he wouldn't let someone like Ron get the best of him. Burn kept swinging wildly, but our hero sidestepped each attack. Then something clicked for Ron. He could suddenly see the fist, the entire trajectory of the swing. He could now predict every attack with perfect clarity. Burn, meanwhile, gathered his energy into his fist again and screamed, "Just give up!" Burn charged forward for the final blow, yelling that it was all over. He launched himself into the air, but Ron simply looked up at him and asked, "Really?" Ron concentrated energy into his own fist, and the two attacks met with a thunderous clap. Immediately, Burn recoiled his hand, looking at it in complete bewilderment. Before he could finish the thought, Ron landed another clean hit, forcing a sharp cough from Burn. The audience gasped, shouting, "Impossible! Wasn't that the righteous tiger fist How did he do that?" On his hands and knees, Burn gasped for air, glaring at Ron in outrage. How did you use the righteous tiger fist?" Ron simply replied, "You showed me. I just copied your moves." The onlookers were floored. "That's impossible. How could he learn it just by watching?" "He must have practiced it in secret," someone yelled. "Otherwise how?" In the crowd, Rumor covered his mouth, completely stunned, thinking, this kid is no joke. First, he didn't just block the righteous tiger fist. He redirected its energy. The ability to perceive another master's mana flow is already incredible. But to then use that flow to reproduce the technique instantly, a talent like that could make him the most powerful person on the continent. This is the exact kind of genius Zgart has been waiting for. The heavens themselves have blessed him. A grin broke out on Rumor's face as he declared, "We have a winner. This is an absolute victory in front of everyone here. The victory goes to Ron." He clapped a hand on our hero's shoulder, raised his arm high, and announced, "And with that, the test is over." The next moment, Sylvia sprinted to her son and wrapped him in a huge hug. Wrath appeared right behind her, declaring he was hungry and that they should go home. All around them, other parents were running to their kids too, congratulating them on passing the test. An instructor named Rowan put his hands on Burn's shoulders to lead him away, but Burn's gaze was locked on his furious-looking father in the crowd. A little later, Burn found himself standing in his father's office, eyes fixed on the desk. When his father finally called his name, he jumped in surprise. "Do you remember what I told you?" his father asked. Burn replied that he was told to become the top student and never lose. His father, Karun, turned around and confirmed it. "I didn't ask for the world," says Suggs. Karun said, "Just for you to beat that fool from the Siren family and become the top student. Instead, you lost to the son of an insect who was kicked out of the main branch. You chose to shame our family in front of the whole world. Do you want to end up just like your worthless brother?" Burn tried to stammer out an excuse, but his father interrupted. "You've already blown your first opportunity. Luckily for you, they'll reevaluate the top student at the end of the first semester. You will take that spot. Now get out." With those final words, he turned his back on his son, who meekly agreed and left the room. As he walked down the street, his father's words echoed in his mind. He absolutely could not let this final opportunity slip through his fingers if he ever wanted to be recognized as part of the Zgart main family. He was out of options. He slammed his fist into the wall, shouting, "Damn it all. This is all because of that stupid idiot." He was at his wit's end, and it was all that fool's fault. Rayon, that bastard. But why he had worked so incredibly hard to be the very best. He covered his face in his hands, then looked up at the building as he approached, wondering how in the world he ended up here. He figured his own 2 feet must have carried him here purely out of habit. After a moment, he stepped inside the building, glancing around and thinking it must be empty because the test had ended today. He grabbed a pair of dumbbells, then his eyes drifted to the side, toward the lockers. He walked over to the one with Ron's name on it and pulled it open. Peeking inside, he told himself he was just taking a look, right? It wasn't like he was stealing anything. He was just looking. Suddenly his eyes shot wide open in shock as he asked himself, where in the world did all these shoes come from? He picked one up, realizing there had to be at least 10 pairs here. Did he really wear all of these out in just 6 months? He himself had barely gone through 2 pairs in that same amount of time after that. He turned, imagining the protagonist, drenched in sweat, pushing himself through another workout. He realized that while he was busy acting all high and mighty, just swinging his sword around and skipping basic training to lounge around in his room, Rayon had been constantly training. This was the true path to Zgart's strength. He finally understood he had completely lost his way. After that, his gaze fell back to the dumbbells on the floor. He placed the shoe back in the locker and walked out of the building. Meanwhile, the MC was staring at the system window as wrath flew beside him, saying that he simply could not believe it. He's been around this world for hundreds of years, but he'd never witnessed anything remotely like this. Seriously, what do you... The protagonist just shrugged, saying he had no idea, but he could make something up if he'd like. Wrath grumbled that he probably shouldn't. "You owe me a stat," the MC said, looking at the system window, which read, "You have won the bet with Wrath. Rewards available plus 2 points to all stats. One stat of your choice. One of Wrath's stats will be transferred to you. You have received a random stat, Legendary Sense, Stage 1. Wrath scoffed. Legendary Sense? What a ridiculously grand name for a skill you don't even deserve. It expands the range of your senses, it's true. While it's only at the first stage, it'll boost your senses by about 10%. But before he could explain how it could increase his senses by 10 times, the protagonist cut in, "Oh, really, not bad. But why is it called Legendary Sense?" Wrath puffed up his chest and replied that he just came up with it. "Doesn't it sound cool?" The MC deadpanned, "You have seriously terrible taste." Wrath was outraged. "What you have, zero appreciation for the finer things in assault." Sometime later, the MC was standing in the courtyard when Ran approached, announcing that the head of the family was summoning the young master. Sylvia clutched her chest, her expression filled with worry. "He's calling for him. Did he do something wrong?" Rowan placed a reassuring hand on his chest and smiled, telling her not to worry. "The head just wishes to personally present him with the bronze emblem." A short while later, the protagonist bowed deeply, saying, "I greet the head of the family." Glenn sat upon his throne and stated, "Though it pains me to do so, I must honor my promise." Ran, holding a tray with the emblem, agreed with a nod. He approached Rayon and said, "I present you with the promised emblem. You may exchange it for any item of equal value." Rayon immediately replied, "In that case, there is something I'd like right now. Sylvia's card. What must I do to have her returned to her proper position?" The family head clarified, "I assume you mean restoring her status within the main branch." The protagonist confirmed it, thinking to himself, "Why does it feel like his aura has gotten softer?" Glenn then answered, "Achievements. If you accumulate enough significant achievements, your wish will be granted. But it is nowhere near as simple as it sounds. Gaining recognition in this family is as difficult as plucking a star from the night sky. It's virtually impossible, especially for a mere child like you." The protagonist just smiled back at him and said, "But it's not entirely impossible, is it?" With that, he reached for the emblem and said, "Very well, I thank you for the answer, my lord." After that, he turned to leave, but Glenn's voice stopped him. "Wait." Rayon turned back as Glenn continued, "You didn't ask for a reward, you asked a question. I would have answered that even without the emblem." Rayon thought in complete shock, "Would I never imagine the Northern King of Destruction would say something like that?" Glenn then told Ron to name whatever reward he wanted. Ron clenched his fist in thought. He knew exactly what he needed more than anything else at this very moment. "I want a growth technique," he said. The patriarch simply replied, "The instructors in the basic course will teach you that." Ron put a hand to his chest, explaining, "I need an aura technique far more powerful than the basic one, something befitting the bronze emblem I earned." He knew deep down that the shadow growth technique from his past life wouldn't be enough to restore Sylvia's family title and eliminate Daryus. He needed the most powerful technique he could get his hands on. The family head considered this. A growth technique, huh? With a snap of his fingers, a set of grand doors opened before them, revealing a library with shelves that stretched to the ceiling. Ron stared in awe at the sight. From the doorway, Glenn watched his reaction and said, "These books? From the Zgart archives." He just had to stretch his hand toward the center, and the book he needed most right now would come to him. "All right," he thought, raising his hand. His mind was set. He needed something more powerful for his aura development. He really hoped there was something good in here. In the next instant, one of the books slid out of its place on the shelf and flew toward him, already open. He stared in awe, wondering, what in the world is this ancient book, the head of the family? Watch this unfold, completely baffled. Ran was equally stunned. They both cried out in shock, why that book? That's when the protagonist read the title, "The Thousand Lights Technique." He muttered, "What kind of technique is this?" As he reached out and touched one of the pages. The moment he did, a brilliant flash of light engulfed the entire space. The pages scattered as the book fell to the floor, where it immediately burst into flames. In that moment, a memory flooded Glenn's mind of a servant kneeling on one knee, asking, "Do you truly believe the family has turned its back on Sylvia?" His reply had been cold. "I don't care. Right now, my priority is the prosperity of this family. Everything else is secondary." The servant had pressed, "Sylvia ran away because of some man. He had cut him off, telling him to stop, bothering him with such trivial matters. In the distant past, when he was convinced emotions were useless and his only focus was the family's power, he had reached the very pinnacle of martial skill. He secured the family's prestigious position in society, but he overlooked something vital. Then the report came that his daughter and son-in-law had been ambushed. Eden had spotted Lady Sylvia and managed to intervene. She was unharmed, but the other two were taken down. And from what he gathered, the ambush was so sudden they couldn't even fight back. I am pathetic, he thought. My emotions have consumed me. It's too late to change anything now, but Ron must know, even if he and Sylvia hate my guts this time, I will absolutely protect them. The protagonist stared at his hands in confusion, thinking, what was that just now? It felt as if something had flowed directly into his mind. The next second, the family head called out to him, jumping up from his seat and demanding to know what he had just done. He answered honestly, I don't know myself. The entire content of the technique just suddenly appeared inside my head. The head asked, do you remember the name? He looked down at his hands again and said, the Thousand Fire Technique. A system window appeared. The Thousand Fire Technique sets you on the path of the ancient flame. The Thousand Fire Technique has been saved to your memory. Glenn asked in a low voice, are you saying the book's contents were just downloaded into your head? He confirmed that was exactly what happened. The head said, is that so good? You have received your bronze emblem reward. You may leave. Ron thanked him and made his way to the exit. As the massive doors closed behind him, Rand started to ask, is it possible that the technique the young master received is... Before he could finish, the head of the family confirmed it. He nodded grimly and said, he has received the technique of the very first head of the Zgart family in the entire history of our clan. No one has ever been able to obtain or even read that book. To think that it actually chose him. Rand said, if this information gets out both, he and Miss Sylvia could be in serious danger. The family head waved him off. Don't worry about it. Nobody even knows the Thousand Lights technique exists. He then asked, what do we do now that the book itself is gone? The head replied, it doesn't matter. The knowledge has been passed on. It's not like anyone else was ever granted it anyway. If it wasn't for that kid, I'm sure that book would have just kept rotting away on the shelf. It looks like things are about to change. A great deal. Meanwhile, the protagonist sat on his bed staring at his hands and thinking, this is strange. Why would he let me choose a book for a mere silver emblem? No, not even for a gold one. Nobody just gives away knowledge of this level. This technique is easily on par with the Ring of Fire, which is also a legendary tier skill. This is worth mastering. It's definitely worth mastering, that's for sure. However, as he thrust his hand forward to concentrate, he sighed in his mind, another failure. No matter how hard he tried, it wasn't working. Then again, no one ever said learning a technique of this level would be a walk in the park. Wrath, who was floating beside him, snickered. Seems like not everything is going according to your master plan, is it? You'd better keep at it. It would be a real problem if someone were to interrupt you in that state of concentration. So you better be careful. You got yourself a really powerful technique there. It would be a terrible shame if you ended up permanently disabled. The protagonist eyed him suspiciously, wondering what he was getting at. He had a point. The Thousand Flames technique was all about pulling in natural mana to forge an aura right in the core of the energy stream. If that got disturbed, the mana streams and energy core could be permanently wrecked. And for him, it was a whole lot riskier since his mana streams were already under that frost curse. He then said, "If you knew that you shouldn't be messing with me," Wrath just cracked a smile and said, "Oh well, sucks to be you." Our hero shot back in disbelief, "You wouldn't." Wrath replied, "Just this once, just for kicks, I'm going to interfere with your training." Rand, smiling, told him to hold his horses. He warned that Wrath could get hurt too, and it wasn't a smart move. But Wrath just scoffed, saying he didn't give a damn. He admitted he couldn't take it himself, being only human. But even if his limbs got lopped off or his energy core went kaboom, he could bring him right back. The catch, he'd have to break down and beg for it. "So this is a pretty sweet deal for you. Don't you think?" He pushed. Our guy sighed. "Fine, you said just once. Let's see what you got." Wrath then zipped forward, taunting, "Don't act so tough. You should be shaking in your boots. You don't even know when I'm going to strike." The protagonist knew he was dealing with an enemy, a creature from the demon world, that was just itching to take over his body the second he got a chance, the literal embodiment of rage. He'd been quiet as a church mouse lately, so our hero had let his guard down, but it looked like it was time to be on high alert again. Then he put a hand on his bed and said, "Whatever, I'll worry about that later. Right now, I've got bigger fish to fry." He got up and moved to the window. Wrath asked, "You heading out now?" He confirmed it. "She's here every night. This isn't just a coincidence." Peering out the window, he added, "We need to handle this." He figured it was time to dust off some old skills. It had been way too long. Over by the pond, Judial was sitting on the bank, writing a note. She mused that she'd never been able to pass along anything more than useless gossip before. But today she had something real. She was just a servant in the annex after all. And she thought, how in the world did he get such a valuable technique for a measly bronze emblem? Not to mention the flow of mana she felt when he was training his aura was totally bizarre. This kind of intel was definitely worth passing up the chain. It would be a big deal even at the martial arts hall. Keeping tabs on a kid, yeah, it has its perks. She folded the note a few times, and as she looked at it, she wondered, how much longer do I have to keep doing this? With that, she let it go into the water. All right, time to head back. But before she could even finish the thought, a cold blade was at her throat. The protagonist stood behind her, his voice a low growl. "Make a sound, and you're dead. Move and I'll slit your throat. Now look down at the lake." She did, her mind racing. Who is this? Who could have such a powerful killing intent? Then she saw his reflection and thought in shock, Ron, how did this brat sneak up on me? He leaned in close to her ear and whispered, "I've felt you watching me since the day I got back to the annex, so did you find what you were looking for?" Her mind reeled. That was impossible. Did he know from the very beginning? She was so sure she'd hidden her presence, perfectly covered all her tracks. He was just pretending not to notice her. Why the MC ordered, "Open your mouth." She did as he said, and he shoved something down her throat. She grimaced, trying to puke it back up immediately. But the protagonist just casually picked up the soggy note from the water, turning it over in his hands and saying that he couldn't read what was written. "Seems like you need a special trick to make the message appear. Water, earth, fire. Wind, moonlight, sunlight." "Ah, I bet it's moonlight." The maid's eyes widened in shock. How did he know? He kept going. Alice Zgart, Karen Zgart, Daniel. I'm guessing Karen is the one behind all this. She clenched her jaw, totally bewildered. She stared at him, thinking this couldn't be happening. Her expression hadn't changed one bit. She had trained for years to become a top-tier spy. There was no way he could have read anything from her face, but wait. That burning pain spreading through her body, his insane ability to read people's thoughts. There was only one possible explanation. She started to tremble uncontrollably as she realized, did he just feed me a frenzy worm? She flashed back to Karun's orders. Sneak into the annex and report every single detail about Ron and Sylvia's lives to me. If you handle this mission well, he would make her dream come true. She demanded, furious, did you feed me a frenzied worm? He feigned surprise. Oh, you know about those? To think she'd actually figured it out. Horrified, she slapped a hand over her mouth, gagging as she tried to throw up. She knew the worst part about those worms wasn't just that the master knows what you feel and where you are. It's that they can torture and even kill you on a whim. And judging by his reaction, he had definitely fed her one. He calmly stated that the letter on its way to Karun exposed her as a spy for the Central Martial Arts Hall. He figured she'd been sent about 7 months ago, right after the selection ceremony. It was a detailed report, too, not just on him, but on his mother Helen and even the other maids. Staring at him, she remembered thinking this mission would be a piece of cake. He was just a kid. Sylvia had no power core, and the mana flow here was a mess. She thought she'd wrap this up in no time, but this wasn't a child. He was a monster. I'll change the letter. I'll change it right now, she shrieked. She pleaded that she'd write some kind of lie. There's no point, he said flatly. Even if you change it now, that information will get to Karun eventually. And when it does, your letter will be the perfect proof of your betrayal. She was shaking with fear as he crouched down in front of her, looking her dead in the eye. He told her that from now on she was a double agent. She could pass along information that was about to become public knowledge anyway, but nothing of any real importance. In return, she would tell him everything he needed to know. She stammered that she understood. He gave a slight nod, and as he walked away, he added that he expected some valuable news the next time they met. Just then, Wrath zipped up to him and asked, "Where in the world did you get a frenzied worm?" He scoffed, replying that he'd never used something so disgusting. He just needed a convincing fake that could cause a short burst of excruciating pain. Wrath paused. "Wait a minute. Then how did you read her emotions without a worm?" Ron replied coolly. "The truth is always in the little details. Most people just don't notice." But Wrath noticed. "You really are a monster," he thought. After that whole incident, Ron refocused on his aura training. The day to return to the training hall was fast approaching, and even though he poured every ounce of effort into cultivating his aura before he had to leave, he still couldn't manage to activate it. A short time later, everyone was gathered at the designated spot. The protagonist glanced around, thinking it looked like only about 42 people had made it through. The rumors were true. Only a quarter of the trainees were left. His prediction had come true. Just then, Luna called out his name. He turned surprised to see her and just stared for a moment. A few days earlier, back at the main Scion residence, Luna's mother had asked, "So young Master Ron has been helping you with your training?" Luna confirmed with a nod, munching on a cookie. "Did you thank him properly?" her mother pressed. Luna replied that she gave him a cookie. Her mother then asked, "But did you thank him with your words?" To which Luna said no, looking a bit surprised. "But why?" she asked. Luna explained that her dad told her not to talk to boys first. Her mother smiled warmly. "And is that so? Well, Luna, it doesn't matter if they're a boy or a girl when you need to say thank you. If someone helps you, you should always say it. That's just good manners." "Okay," Luna agreed. "I'll be sure to thank him next time." Back in the present, she awkwardly thanked the protagonist. He was taken aback and just said, "Okay." Wrath, completely confused, asked what was wrong with her. The protagonist could only whisper back that he had no idea. Seriously, how was he supposed to know? Just then, a sweat-drenched Dorian ran up to them panting, "Am I late? How are you holding up?" He looked like he was barely hanging on. He probably wouldn't even make it through the trial period, but here he is, an official student. It's so ridiculously tough that he's constantly having nightmares. Just last night, he couldn't get a wink of sleep, terrified he'd completely bomb it today. Honestly, he's just relieved it was him who ended up as the top student and not young Master Byrne. But just then he spun around in terror to find Byrne standing right behind him. He was so startled he actually fell right on his butt, while Byrne just loomed over Ron. The silence was super awkward. Then Burn suddenly bowed and asked for forgiveness, admitting he'd acted unworthily last week. He acknowledged his loss, but declared that next time he wouldn't back down. He swore he'd do everything he could to surpass him and wouldn't quit until he did. With that, he just turned and walked away. The protagonist thought to himself that for a 13-year-old kid admitting his mistakes like that was pretty impressive. Guess that's what you'd expect from the main family. Branch. Wrath, however, was screaming in his head. That kid got thrashed like a punching bag, and he's still acting all high and mighty. For that, he deserves to have his eyes scratched out. The protagonist grabbed him by the tail, telling him to chill out because Burn was just a kid. In response, Wrath shrieked that he didn't care and that there was no need to be so dramatic. Just then, Rumor walked up to the kids, awkwardly scratching the back of his head and apologizing for being a bit late. He admitted he'd had a few too many drinks last night and overslept. Anyway, he asked how they were doing and congratulated them on officially becoming his students. He announced that today their real training would begin. Some of the drills would be the same, but they'd be adding new ones into the mix. They were about to start training on inflicting damage. Suddenly, the gates swung open and a girl named Martha stormed onto the field. She let out an annoyed sigh and yelled, "Ugh, doors everywhere, so annoying." Dorian yelped in fear. "This girl!" The instructor just crossed his arms, smirked, and said, "Here's our straggler. She'll be training with you guys since she flunked her course with another instructor. From now on, she's your classmate, so say hello. This is Martha Zgart, a representative from the main branch." He quickly added that they shouldn't judge her by her appearance, insisting, "On the inside, she's really kind." But before he could finish, she cut him off with a wave of her hand. "That's enough. Who's the top student here?" she demanded. "You gotta agree it's annoying when some weakling gets ranked higher than you, right? So I want to see the strongest one for myself. Come on, let's fight." Ron wondered what was wrong with his luck and why he was always getting dragged into these messes. He then stepped forward and introduced himself, explaining that he was the top student. She sized him up with interest, leaned in close, and said he didn't look the part. "Let's get this started already." Just then, Burn stepped up behind her, crossed his arms, and told her she was acting disgracefully. She whipped around and demanded, "Who's that yapping behind me?" She got right in his face and said, "Hey, Burn, you better watch your mouth or you'll end up in a ditch. You should really think about who you're talking to." But he just shot back. Ron proved he was worthy of the top spot in front of the family head and the instructors. "Who are you to challenge that?" She was furious. "Oh yeah, well, I'm challenging it. But who are you to talk?" He replied, "That's exactly why I'm speaking up. I don't want anyone to repeat my mistakes and act so shamefully." The protagonist was surprised, thinking that Burn really had changed. At that moment, Luna jumped between them and, spreading her arms wide, told Martha to leave him alone. Martha just smirked. "Wow, look at the strong bond between classmates, protecting your own. Like a bunch of loyal puppies." Then she started to walk away, scratching her head. "Looks like I'll just be another barking dog if I keep this. Fine, I'll let it go for now. But you should all know I hate cowards who hide behind their friends even more than I hate useless show-offs." With those words, she suddenly spun around and lunged straight for the protagonist. Everyone else whirled around completely shocked. Despite the surprise, Martha swung her fist, yelling for him to take this. But the protagonist easily caught her hand and threw her to the ground. She managed to break her fall and looked up in shock at his fist, speeding towards her. They both leaped back in opposite directions. A stunned Burn shouted, What? She skidded to a stop as someone else yelled, "What the hell? Hey, you're not getting out of this in one piece." She swung her fist again, but this time the instructor caught her arm and said firmly, "That's enough." She thought to herself, when did he even get here? It was like he was invisible to her. She'd completely forgotten he was even there, and he could tell. Even if he wasn't intimidating, getting ignored like that still stung. Besides, Ron hadn't even awakened his aura yet, so it wouldn't be a fair fight anyway. Didn't she get that he wasn't opposed to sparring, but only after he actually learned how? She just waved her hand dismissively, saying she was already leaving. Then the instructor walked over to our hero and told him to get back to his spot too. He agreed. But inside his head, Wrath was screaming, "What is he doing? Is he just going to let that fool get away with this? She's asking for it. If it were me, I would have ripped her limbs off and tossed her carcass onto a glacier to freeze. Ron simply replied that he'd already landed a hit on her. Wrath roared back that it wasn't enough. He had to finish her off. Ron told him it wasn't the right time. He figured if he was going to challenge her for the top spot, it'd be far more profitable to make a bet and take something from her. He thought, patience, my friend, I'll get our revenge a little later. After a short while, everyone resumed their training. The instructor announced a 10-minute break. Byrne took a sip of water and then looking at his hand thought, this isn't easy. Up to level 2 wasn't so bad because I already knew it, but level 3 and beyond gets difficult because of all the added exercise variations. He then glanced over to the side and thought, but on the other hand, there's Ron. He started from scratch and learned it in less than a month. It took me a whole month just to learn the 7-form fist. At this rate, he'll be moving on to sword training at the same time as me. Well, at least I'm not the only one who's impatient. Then he looked over at Martha, who was swinging her sword with incredible speed, and wondered, is she in a race too? She stopped breathing hard and muttered, damn it. She thought, Ron, he should be learning these fist techniques for the very first time. How is he improving so quickly? He didn't study it beforehand like Burin or Luna. His body was supposed to be a wreck because of the frost curse, so how can he train for days on end? She told herself she couldn't fall behind. A brilliant talent. That's what they all called her. Ever since she was adopted by Zgart, she had been relentlessly single-minded. She had surpassed every other kid from both the main and branch families who arrogantly thought they were geniuses. She used to laugh at their despair. She was the genius here. She would always do better. That was who she was. That was her place. But right now she was falling behind and she couldn't bear it. Sometime later, as she was walking down a path, a subordinate bowed and commented that she had done a good job today. She just nodded and walked on, but as he watched her go, he said, there's no point in driving yourself so hard. She spun around and asked what he was talking about. He answered calmly, young Master Ron might be able to surpass many others, but he will never be able to surpass you. He'll never surpass me. Why? She demanded. He replied, because the young master has a weakness that he can never overcome. Not long before this, our hero was still training, already completely out of breath. One of the onlookers asked another, think I can ask him about this stance? Could I watch like last time? His friend told him it was probably better not to ask him right now. The first guy replied, but he really is an incredible swordsman. Just then Martha began to clap and said, great, amazing, I never thought you would be training at my level so soon. You're even surpassing a genius. You learn so quickly. However, given your poor sensitivity to mana, all your efforts are useless. What a pity that your talent will never amount to anything, although you'll probably make an excellent instructor for the young swordsman. The crowd watched in dead silence. As she turned, she noticed how quiet everyone was. Just as she'd expected, she was certain no one had anticipated this. That this was his fatal flaw, and that he wouldn't be able to master aura, not even in 4 months. Back in the present, the subordinate explained that young Master Ron would never be able to master aura. Martha was stunned. What? He replied, it seems you didn't know since you were only accepted into the family a short time ago. But at the mana sensitivity ceremony, young Master Ron's indicator was at the absolute lowest possible level. The only person in the entire 5th training hall who still hasn't mastered aura is none other than young Master Ron. Even if he received the growth technique for the bronze emblem, it's barely above average. It might be better than the Linden technique that everyone starts with, but considering he still hasn't mastered aura, it's not going to matter. He's certain the ceremony's results were legit. He could become the most skilled swordsman and fighter out there, but he just can't get a handle on aura. That means he will never truly be a martial artist. Meanwhile, Martha, with a flick of her hair, admitted to herself she was still ticked off about losing to that moron, but she was finally starting to push him out of her thoughts. Then she glanced over, surprised to see Luna standing right there, and asked if she needed something. Luna said that she needed to go. Martha just chuckled. Anything else? Luna just repeated that she had to go. Martha shrugged. Fine by me. I'm out of here anyway. She started walking in the opposite direction, adding, with a wave, that she was heading to the advanced classes, which were reserved exclusively for the main family. A little later, our protagonist plopped down on a bench, letting out a heavy sigh. Towel in hand, he muttered that he'd done more than enough for one day. He stared at his hand, thinking that it was actually fun. Back on the battlefield, he relied on survival tactics and quick takedowns, not proper martial arts. The only thing he'd really leveled up was his skill set as an assassin. He never imagined he'd get the chance to study anything else. He had no idea that learning martial arts, just for the heck of it, could be this much fun. Just then, Wrath zipped up next to him, yelling, "So did it finally sink in? I can't believe you just stood there and did nothing." While that girl was running her mouth, "You idiot," the protagonist looked confused. "A girl," Wrath shot back. "Yeah, that black-haired one. She was spouting all kinds of nonsense about you." The protagonist asked, "Oh, right, I didn't hear her. I was too zoned in." Wrath screeched that he needed to pay more attention. "If she said something like that about me, I would have turned her into a human popsicle by now." R calmly replied that he'd already told him it wouldn't do any good to fight her right now. "Even without the Thousand Lights technique, I could easily take down someone at her level." He then opened the door to his room, only to stop short, surprised to see Luna. He asked what she was doing there. She opened the box she was holding and offered him a dessert, simply telling him to eat it. He took it, noticing it was cold to the touch. "What is this?" he wondered. She just repeated that he should eat it. He nodded, thinking to himself that the number one rule of an assassin is to never eat food from a stranger, but he really didn't think she would try to poison him or something. The moment he swallowed the treat, his eyes widened in surprise. Wrath was shocked too. "Whoa, the cold aura just makes it taste better. What is this stuff?" Luna asked him how it was. He replied that it was delicious, and she explained that it was a scoop of ice cream. With that, she closed the box and turned, and started to walk away. He reached out a hand, telling her to wait. Wrath yelled, "Hey, give me one too before you scram." What a weird girl, the protagonist thought, watching her leave in bewilderment. Was she actually worried about me? Turns out Luna has a major sweet tooth. It looked like there were supposed to be 4 scoops in the box. Did she save the last one for me on purpose? It must be tough for her to part with her favorite treats. He sighed and said that was really nice of her. He'd have to pay her back someday. A little later, they were outside and Wrath piped up, "Well, in that case, you should at least ask for more of that tasty stuff." Then the protagonist headed into the building announcing, "I'm back." Judiel exclaimed, "Mr. Ron, it's been a while. We haven't seen you in ages. What took you so long?" He replied that he was only gone for a week. She then asked if he was hungry, offering to cook him something right away. He told her he was fine, but she insisted he sit down. She handed him a note explaining that she was about to send this report to the middle hall and their arts division. He asked if there were any other orders. She replied, "Nothing out of the ordinary. Up until recently, they had me keeping a close watch on you. Since you started making such huge strides in your swordsmanship and combat skills, but now it feels like they're losing interest in you all because you can't train your aura." R asked, "And what about my mom?" She replied that she didn't think they were particularly interested in Miss Sylvia either. She was worried they might recall her. "That's not good," he thought. "She's actually pretty useful." And then she added, "Maybe you're not showing off your aura skills on purpose," he asked. Surprised, "Oh, and what makes you think that?" She quickly lowered her head and told him to just forget she said anything, apologizing for asking such an inappropriate question. He replied, "It's fine, you can go now." She bowed, saying she understood. And right on cue, Wrath chimed in, "Whoa, look at that. Somebody thinks you're hiding your power on purpose." Wrath muttered, "Well, I guess that was logical," and then he added, "But man, isn't training your aura just ridiculously hard for you?" "I can't even imagine why," Wrath continued. Ron replied that he didn't know either, which was exactly why he had to train even harder. Wrath was stunned again. "This kid's a monster. You should probably get some sleep," Wrath suggested. The protagonist walked toward his door, muttering that more training was the only answer for his aura problem. But before he could finish the thought, his eyes shot open. Rimmer was sitting on a stump in the yard, casually surrounded by a flock of birds. Ron called out to him, and the instructor turned, asking, "Get enough sleep?" The MC was shocked. "Why are you here?" Rimmer replied that he'd come to give him some instruction, placing a hand on his shoulder and saying he was about to find out what his attribute was. A little later, they were heading deep into the forest. As they walked, the protagonist said, "So I thought you were going to tell me about my attribute. So why did he drag them all the way up into the mountains?" His friend simply said, "Patience, my boy, patience." Even if he was a bit of a slacker, he was still an incredible teacher. The protagonist wondered how he was supposed to learn anything in a place like this, but then he recalled the first time he saw his master's technique. His flames were so powerful it felt like standing at the mouth of an active volcano. His skill was on a completely different plane compared to everyone else. The sheer genius of how he assimilated the cold within his body, fusing it with the fire inside his mana circulation circle, was breathtaking. If only Ron could truly master that technique. Shaking off the memory, he turned and said, "All right, this spot seems about right." Rand shot back, "We're in the middle of a forest." "Why here?" The instructor pointed a finger at him, explaining that he once created a sword from the wind to shield his lord. Now he wanted Ron to feel that very same wind. The protagonist stared silently at his hand as his master added, "Maybe I should have toned it down a bit, but he doesn't seem scared at all. His behavior isn't normal for a kid," he thought. "I've felt the wind since I was born because I'm an elf, but he's human. Plus his mana flow is clogged by the cold, so this should be way harder for him. There are all kinds of winds, warm breezes, chilling gusts, and even violent gales. I wanted a wind sword that could slice through anything, and I made it happen. But he needs to choose a path that suits him personally. He needs to think about the kind of fire he wants to wield." The protagonist looked at his hand again, saying, "But we're in the north. We can't just create a huge flame here. We could burn down the whole forest." Rimmer waved a hand dismissively near his face and said, "Yeah, that would be a total catastrophe." He then added that he knew the perfect place for it. A little while later, they walked into a charcoal workshop and the instructor called out, "Hey, old man, I'm here." Velkan replied, grumbling that he'd been wondering why his flame was acting up. Turns out Rimmer's presence was snuffing it out. The instructor crossed his arms and told the old man to just forget it, saying he wouldn't succeed today either. The MC, looking around, asked where they were. He explained that this place, a charcoal workshop, was home to the hottest, most intense fires in the entire northern region. Velkan turned and snapped, "What kind of stray did you drag in this time?" Rimmer just said, "Easy there, he's the grandson of the head of the house." The old man was shocked. He'd been retired for a long time. So it was a big deal for the family head's kin to show up personally. Rand stared at the furnace and thought, is this what true fire looks like? He'd seen countless fires in his past life. Flames he'd made himself, and even magical ones created by wizards. But this was different. The heat, the appearance, the flickers, this was the perfect image of the fire he wanted to command. He reached his hand toward the fire, then clenched it into a fist, only to notice the old man had lowered the flames. The master then introduced himself, stating that if he was expecting a warm welcome, he'd come to the wrong place. The protagonist thought in utter shock. The master craftsman, famous across the entire continent for his work, is this really him standing right in front of me? This was the man rumored to have forged the legendary sword, Glenn the Sword of True Paradise, before he vanished 30 years ago. To think he'd been hiding here all this time. After that he bowed and said it was an honor to meet him, then introduced himself. The master turned to the instructor and asked if he'd been telling the kids stories about him. He quickly shook his head, denying it completely. Then he looked at the protagonist and said, "This old-timer is the retired master craftsman Zgart." The instructor shouted, "That's right, retired for more than 10 years. All he's done is stoke this furnace, making fires his whole life year-round." So he continued, "There's no better place to experience a true flame. Are you going to help us out or not?" The craftsman asked why they didn't just go to the forges. Rimmer replied that there were too many prying eyes there. He didn't want anyone to see the technique until Ron had completely mastered it. The old man wondered what on earth he was talking about. Rimmer simply said, "Ron is Sylvia's son." The craftsman froze. The MC quickly added that he wouldn't be a bother, he swore. He just asked to be allowed to try and feel the flames. Velkan finally said that he was trying to make charcoal. He wanted to create golden charcoal, which could produce a flame more powerful than white or black charcoal. In fact, he'd already spent 10 years trying to invent it. He didn't care what they did, so long as they stayed out of his way. Our hero gave him a cheerful thank you. A little later, the two adults were standing outside when the instructor looked at the craftsman and said, "He's surprisingly kind. I never expected him to agree that quickly." He clapped him on the shoulder, adding that if he treats the kid right, he'll hook him up with some good liquor. The craftsman noted that he wasn't doing this for his sake. The moment the child stepped inside, the flames in the forge erupted and the heat spiked so intensely that the coal was instantly incinerated. This kid's aura has the power to command fire. If he's really the one, my dreams might finally come true. For 7 whole months, he'd been visiting Velen. Ron focused on the image of the fire he wanted. He closed his eyes and thought, fire. It finally clicked. Most people think of fire as the most terrifying and destructive element. But it's a completely different story when you're the one in control. A flame honed through years of training is far more stable than any other element. Besides, the 1,000 Flames technique is a huge help with that. The instructions said to envision the fire he wanted to wield. Ron thought to himself, think about the fire. The kind of flame he needed. What he truly needed was a way to take down Tellus and restore Sylvia to her rightful place. The path to his goals was shrouded in darkness, making it impossible to see where he was going. He needed a brilliant torch to illuminate the way, a flame that would be his weapon against the monsters lurking in the shadows. A flame that couldn't be extinguished by rain or snow, an unyielding flame. That was the fire he desired. Ron could feel a searing energy seeping into his very being. The intense heat of the workshop was permeating his body. He had to focus and seize this fire, feel it in his core. Was this the state of spiritual enlightenment from meditation? And he could now vividly see the images forming in his mind. Just as he focused a little harder, a voice suddenly shattered his concentration. "Now it's my turn. Didn't I tell you I'd strike when you were most vulnerable? Have a taste of my frosty flame?" Ron grit his teeth, thinking, I let my guard down. Of all times, why now he'd almost forgotten about him because he'd been so quiet lately. But that thing was never on his side. It's a demon whose only goal is to end him. A demon lord. This is terrifying. His body felt like it was being torn apart. It was a struggle just to breathe. If he even tried to move, he'd die instantly. But what could he do? Stopping the 1,000 Flames technique now meant certain death. All he could do was focus his aura. He had to think. Think fast if he wanted to live. But his consciousness was slipping away. Wrath mocked him. How pathetic your struggles look. You think you can suppress my power like you did before? It's completely useless. Your soul and your body are mine now. Ron started to black out as Wrath's voice echoed that all his effort, all his struggling was for nothing. You're no different from that old man huffing and puffing at the furnace. But don't you worry. I'll get my revenge for you. Ron's mind latched onto a word. Furnace. Did he say furnace? Thanks for the tip. He had to take a gamble. It was all or nothing. If he didn't try, he was dead anyway. Instead of just absorbing the natural mana warmed by the furnace's heat, he would absorb the mana directly from the flames themselves, a fire far stronger, far hotter one that could devour everything around it. He would take it all in. Ron unleashed the fire and Wrath shrieked, "You, what are you doing?" Ron shot back, "I'm winning." And in that very instant, the blacksmith was resting near the furnace when flames suddenly erupted all around him. Velkon leaped aside, thinking, what in the world's going on? The fire in the furnace shot upwards like a massive pillar. He muttered that he'd never seen a flame so powerful in his entire life. The blacksmith scanned the room and yelled, "What's happening to the furnace?" He glanced over at the MC and thought, Ron Zgart. Is he freezing? Which was crazy, considering the furnace was blazing. Velkon shot to his feet and asked in a panic, "What's wrong with him? Why is he shaking like that?" But before he could say more, Rimmer appeared out of thin air and told him to back off, saying he can't be disturbed right now. Velkon yelled back in frustration, "What are you talking about? He could die." Rimmer blocked his path, explaining that Ron was currently in a spiritual state of complete focus. "We can't help him from the outside," he said. "If we interfere, his insides will literally explode." Velkon frowned, his worry deepening as he asked, "Is this because of that frost curse he mentioned? Is there really nothing we can do?" Rimmer turned away, his expression grim. "No, it's far too dangerous." He could only clench his fist and pray Ron would survive. In Ron's mind, Wrath's voice boomed, ordering him to stop. "What makes you think you even have a chance?" But our MC knew this feeling all too well. He'd already died once in absolute hopelessness during his meaningless past life, but even back then, he never gave up fighting until his very last breath. And he'd be damned if he was going to experience that kind of despair again. At that very moment, Velkan screamed. The temperature was skyrocketing. At this rate, the furnace itself might not be able to handle it. Rimmer stared in shock, thinking, all the mana in the area is flowing to a single point. Ron, is he absorbing all of it? The MC let out a powerful roar as Wrath cursed. Damn it! Ron's eyes snapped open and he reached out, grabbing the flames with his bare hand, which immediately caused a brilliant explosion. A massive shockwave blew the roof clean off the building, and Rimmer screamed into the chaos. Ron, are you okay? He yelled again, demanding an answer. Velkan also cried out for Ron Zgart. Rimmer stared forward in utter disbelief as the MC rose to his feet, completely wreathed in a magnificent flame. He wondered, is that a golden flame? A system window appeared announcing that he had mastered the 1,000 Flames technique. Due to the intense heat, the 1,000 Flames technique was instantly awarded the second rank. He had also obtained a resistance to the fire attribute. 2 of his mana nodes had been freed from the frost curse, and the negative effect of his poor stamina was completely removed. The residual ice energy in his body had been converted into a frost aura, and thanks to the intense cold from Wrath, the frost aura was immediately awarded the second rank. A flower made of pure energy materialized in Ron's hands. He placed his palm on his chest and thought, well, now this is much better than I expected. I'll be back to full strength in no time. Still, who would have thought it would take this much effort? Just then, another system window popped up, catching the MC's eye. It stated that he had passed Wrath's trial under extreme conditions. As a reward for his incredible tenacity, all his stats had been increased by 3 points. Ron thought, am I dreaming? Is all of this really for me? In a single moment, he'd gained what he had struggled for years to achieve. Wrath's voice echoed with discontent. Incredible. What in the world is he? His consciousness was hanging on by a thread. How did he possibly withstand that? The MC replied with a smirk. You're the one who said I wouldn't succeed, that I shouldn't even try. He turned around thinking to himself, I can talk a big game, but I seriously almost died just now. I need to be much more careful. One thing had become crystal clear. Even if they were growing closer, Wrath was still his enemy. He couldn't afford to let him see his weaknesses or learn his secrets. Velkan's worried voice cut in. Are you okay? Ron looked at him and replied, yes, everything is fine. Velkan pushed. Then, did you master the aura? The MC replied, yes, and it's all thanks to you, before offering an apology. Because of me, even the furnace was destroyed. Velkan let out a breath of relief, telling him not to worry about it. The main thing is that you weren't hurt. He turned around and said, I can always build another one. He walked thoughtfully toward the ruined furnace, and the MC asked, what's in there? Velkan suddenly let out a shriek of excitement. This is it. He plunged a shovel into the smoldering fire and pulled out a couple of glowing coals, exclaiming, it's golden coal. Now, a little while ago, whenever Velkan walked down the street, people would talk. Looks like he's heading to the workshop again. They say he's still working on creating that golden coal. Yeah, he's been at it for years. The existence of golden coal was considered nothing more than a legend. Most people were sure he'd retired and was just looking for a hobby because he was bored. Back in the present, Velkan said, it looks like we got lucky, all thanks to you. This is golden coal, it's stronger than white coal, and smolders longer than black coal. Because of this, I can finally create the masterpiece I've been attempting to forge for decades. Thank you, Ron said, a little stunned. Really, but I did almost nothing. Velkan looked at him and then explained, every time you came here to train, the fire in the furnace grew wilder. Your breathing technique breathed new life into it, and the heat from it spread throughout the entire building, Velkan said. He was just an old man who'd spent his whole life hammering away at an anvil, but even he could see clear as day what that boy had done. This was all the kid's doing. So he had to ask just one thing. Ron, what is your goal? Velkan asked. Ron repeated, my goal. Yes, the old man affirmed. What kind of swordsman do you want to become? Ron declared that he wanted to become a swordsman who never gives up no matter what enemy or what situation he finds himself in. Velkan smiled, saying he never expected to hear something like that from a young brat. A swordsman who doesn't know the meaning of retreat, huh? A kid like that could master the sword in just 3 to 5 years. And when you feel you've truly committed to your path, then come back to me. That treasure will be waiting for that day. Ron asked in shock, "Are you saying you're going to forge a sword for me? But I heard you don't do that anymore." Velkon replied, "Sometimes people come out of retirement. So Ron, you'd better try to survive until then." After a bit, he walked Ron out and said his farewells as Ron started down the path along the forest trail, while Rimmer stood on the cliff musing that he was curious to see what would happen next. He'd finally mastered his aura. What he's definitely gifted at is making other people worry about him. "Isn't that right, boss?" Glenn was standing right behind him, scowling with disapproval. Rimmer asked with a grin on his face. You've been coming out here every single day because you were worried about Ron, haven't you? Well, you must feel a lot better now, right?" Glenn shot back that he absolutely did not come because he was worried. Rimmer noted that maybe it was the forge's intense heat, but the quality and purity of that aura are just incredible. Plus, he even managed to stabilize it. That kid is extremely talented. Glenn retorted, "Not in the slightest." Rimmer gave him a questioning look, and Glenn added that the boy even managed to turn his own limitations into a source of strength. After a short while, Luna was standing in the 5th training hall, wondering to herself, "Ran, when are you coming back?" She recalled the other trainees gossiping that Ran still hadn't mastered his aura, even after 7 whole months. Maybe all those rumors about him being some prodigy were just lies. His spot will end up going to young master, Bowen or young lady Martha. In the end, he's just an empty shell. Luna glanced down at the box in her hands, thinking she really wanted to help him. Mom always says that you should repay kindness with kindness. Suddenly, she looked up and saw Ron standing in the doorway. He turned to her and said, "Don't worry, nothing's going to happen to me." He said it with such confidence, Wrath grumbled internally, telling him to quit showing off. Just then, Ran looked up in surprise as Luna approached him. She opened the box filled with sweets and told him this was to cheer him up. Ron took it and said happily, "Hey, this is the same ice cream as before. Thank you, Luna." She looked at him surprised, thinking, has the cool air and scent around him gotten even stronger and nicer? Rayon said internally, "Then you should thank her." Wrath exclaimed in delight, "This flavor, it's just as amazing as the first time. You have to eat the other 2 right now." Ran whispered back, "I can't just take all of her treats. She's just sharing." Wrath ordered him to stop acting like a kid. Ron needed to calm his inner demon down. He closed the box and thanked her. "That was delicious." Luna then asked, "Do you want more?" Rayon replied that one was plenty for him. Luna asked, "So did it help you feel better?" Rayon looked at her surprised for a moment, then sighed and said, "Yeah, it did." Luna smiled brightly and said, "Good." She turned and started to walk away, that happy smile never leaving her face. Ron watched her go and muttered, "I really don't understand that girl." A short time later, Rimmer appeared on the platform and asked if their training had gotten a little dull lately. "Am I right? Because something special is waiting for you all next month. Since you've all mastered the fundamentals and training techniques, the next logical step is to move on to your energy cores." One of the trainees asked what that meant, and another admitted he didn't get it either. "What's he even talking about?" Rimmer just grinned and announced that they were going to be holding duels starting next month. Martha's eyes lit up at the news, and Rimmer added that the results would directly impact their official rankings and status. He told them to use this month to prepare themselves well. Suddenly, Martha raised her hand, calling for a halt. She asked, "And what about those among us who are lagging behind? There are still some who haven't even mastered their aura yet." Every head in the room swiveled to look at Rayon, but Rimmer announced, "Actually, every single student has successfully completed that task." Martha's eyes shot wide open in shock as she demanded, "Since when?" She whipped around and Rimmer casually said, "Sometime yesterday or maybe today. Can't quite recall." Martha grinned wickedly. Finally, my chance has come. She'd been dying of boredom while he was stuck mastering the basics. She started walking towards Ron and said, "You remember what I told you, don't you?" She sneered that she despises kids who are weaker than her. She had put up with his presence long enough, and it would be better for him to just give up his spot if he can't cut it. She declared she would show him how things are really done. Suddenly, Burr's hand shot out in front of her, ordering Martha to back off. He only just mastered his aura, Burr argued. Besides, the duels aren't for another month. You have no honor as a swordsman whatsoever. Martha simply placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Our dear young master, Burr, you worry way too much about honor, probably because it's the only thing you have. I'm sure you know better than anyone that those who are strong enough to stand up for themselves are the ones who deserve their place." Burr frowned and growled, "Martha." She just jerked her thumb back at the guys behind her and said that those simpletons... He mastered aura in just 1 month, while their top student barely pulled it off in 6. Heck, even advanced techniques take less time than that. This means this clown has 0 talent, and he knows it, since they went through the determination ceremony together. Byrne just stays quiet, thinking to himself, a swordsman without an aura can never make a name for himself. Even if he's a genius with a blade without an aura, he's a nobody. Martha then turned around and asked, "Besides, there's a reason the instructor is setting up these duels. He's planning to shake up the rankings. Am I right?" Rimmer threw his arms out wide and asked why. Without missing a beat, Martha turned to Ron and told him he didn't deserve that top spot. It's time to put an end to this charade. He needs to make room for someone who actually deserves it. Martha laid out her challenge. They'd have a duel, and the winner gets the top spot in the rankings. Ron shot back, "No deal. What kind of prize is that? I already have the top spot. If you want a shot at my position as the best student, then you have to offer up something of equal value." Martha just smirked. "Wow, you really don't get the situation at all, do you? You're an idiot. Nobody here considers you worthy of that rank." Our MC shot back, "What are you scared?" Martha's eyes went wide, staring at Ron's smug grin. She asked, "Are you really saying that to me?" She burst out laughing, doubling over. "Oh, I can't breathe. That's hilarious." Martha mocked. "Okay, fine. I don't mind. You don't want a duel without a wager? Is that it? This is an elemental sphere, a special elixir my father gave me. It strengthens the body and spirit. If you win, it's all yours. So what do you say? Not bad, right?" Our MC whispered, "Wraith, remember what you said." About picking the right moment with Martha, Wrath asked, "What are you getting at?" Ron replied that this was it. This was his big advantage. He said, "This is our chance." 1 month later, Martha strode up to the calendar. "It's been a whole month since we made that bet. I'm finally going to make him pay." No one her age had ever beaten her in a fight. For the first time ever, someone had dared to strike her. 8 months later, she finally had a chance to get her revenge for humiliating her. That fool only mastered aura 1 month ago, while she already had 3 years of experience. Getting into a fight with him was pointless, just like waiting around for such a talentless hack. But what could she do? She needed to hurry up and get stronger, because there's someone she wants to save. Martha scowled and muttered, "Ron Zgart, you are finished." After a bit, Rimmer yelled out, "All right, people, eyes up front. Watching these fights from the sidelines is just as educational as being in the sparring match itself. Watch the other students' fights closely and think about how you would act in their place. No need to get nervous. Just show everyone what you're made of. The first match will be Byrne versus Dorian." Byrne answered, "Yes." Dorian, however, raised a shaky hand. Instructor." Rimmer asked, "What is it?" Dorian told him he wanted to surrender. Byrne spun around, his eyes bulging in disbelief. Rimmer just said, "But we haven't even started the match yet." Dorian grabbed his stomach and said, I don't feel well. I'm all shivery and my body feels so heavy." He started coughing, adding that he couldn't sleep at all last night. "It's instructor." Wrath looked on in disgust, remarking that if that were his subordinate, he would have lopped his head off on the spot. Our MC just said that was to be expected. Rimmer encouraged him, "Dorian, you should at least give it a shot. It will be good for you, even if you lose." Dorian looked at him and said, I get it." A second later, he was already on the ground, shouting that he gives up. Rimmer approached Byrne and told him he needed to learn to control his emotions. "Honestly, you should have won that fight in 5 strikes. Byrne replied that he was just a little ticked off by the guy's attitude. He miscalculated. Rimmer asked Dorian, "Why do you always run away?" "You can do this, I know it." He told him that if he'd just fought back, he could have held on much longer. Dorian just begged him for forgiveness, saying he was just too scared. Rimmer announced, "Okay, next up, Luna versus Kane. Get ready to go." Kane swung his sword with a mighty yell while Luna remained completely motionless. She quickly brought up her sword and parried his blow. Rimmer called a stop to it. "That's enough. Kane, you're too nervous. You need to hold the sword more confidently." And as for Luna, she blocked the blow just fine, but her aura control was incomplete. Luna simply replied, "Yes." After a moment, Rimmer announced, "Next." Since they were the last ones up, they were practically vibrating with eagerness. The two students strode to the center of the arena, their eyes blazing with excitement as Rimmer introduced them. Martha versus Ron. Martha unleashed a vicious swing which Ron blocked with a grimace. He then shoved her back and launched a counterattack that clearly caught Martha by surprise. She smirked, hopping backward. She admitted she didn't expect him to block her attacks. He had some talent, she'd give him that, but it was limited to just swinging a sword. Someone as talentless as him in aura control could never truly shine. With that, she raised her sword high and charged straight for Ron. Ron blocked the powerful strike, letting out a small grunt. Martha looked shocked. "You actually blocked that. But how much longer can you hold on? Talent is everything when it comes to aura." "Hey, it's even more important than swordsmanship. Your aura is so tiny that even after 7 months, it hasn't grown any bigger than a pea. There's no way you can become a swordmaster with that." Martha scowled, warning him that if he didn't give up now, her next attack would break his bones. In response, Ron just swung his sword and spoke. "Talent, talent, that's all you ever talk about." It really got under his skin how everyone in this house was so completely obsessed with talent. Martha just smirked and said, "Well, of course a talentless hack like you gets annoyed by it, but I'm happy to demonstrate what real talent is capable of, just to drill the obvious truth into that thick skull of yours." Ron shot back, "In that case, I'll just have to prove you wrong and show you that talent isn't the most important thing." Martha stared at him, baffled. "What?" Just then, Ron activated the Thousand Flames technique. The first flame ignited. Martha froze in shock and whispered, "What kind of fire is this?" Her mind raced. "It's dangerous. This is definitely not some simple flame. It's so small and calm, but there's a terrifying power hidden inside it. It's so mesmerizing, it's giving me goosebumps. What in the world is this flame?" Martha fell silent for a moment, then gripped the hilt of her sword tightly and declared, "I guess playtime is over." She shifted into the hardstone pose. "Single point." Ron watched her carefully, his mind racing. Single point. He knew the technique it gathered all of a user's aura into one spot. For Martha to use it at her age, she really was a prodigy. He knew her next strike would be a critical one. Then Martha spoke. "I'll admit you're strong," she said, "but there's no way your pathetic aura can withstand this attack." With a powerful push off the ground, Martha rocketed towards Ron, who met her charge by swinging his sword and unleashing his flame directly in her path. The other students screamed in fear as the very ground beneath them split apart. Who would win? The entire arena was shrouded in smoke. As the smoke slowly began to clear, the figure was revealed. Martha sprawled on the ground with her sword shattered in her hand. The students cried out, "Ron won, that's impossible." Even Lady Martha lost to him. What was up with his aura anyway? Meanwhile, Ron simply stretched his arms, remaining silent for a moment before he finally spoke. He noticed her fist was still clenched tight, even though